They smashed her wheelchair in broad daylight, and the room fell silent. No one stood up. No one spoke. Until the man sitting in the far corner, whose identity was unknown, set his coffee cup down, stood up, and walked forward. This is the story of two people deliberately forgotten by the world, about power, buried truth, and the one thing money can't buy, the courage to stand by someone when everyone else turns away. If you're watching this far, please like, subscribe, and comment the city you're watching in so I know how far this story has come. Now, let's begin. The diner on Callaway Street had been there longer than most of the town cared to remember. Ruth Ann's Home Kitchen, that was the official name painted in faded yellow letters above the door. But nobody called it that. People just called it Ruth Ann's, the way you call a place by the name of the person who made it what it is, even after that person is long gone. Ruth Ann herself had passed 11 years ago, and her daughter Patsy had taken over the grill, the register, and the particular smell of bacon grease and old coffee that seeped into the walls and never quite left. It was the kind of place where the booths had duct tape over the cracks in the vinyl, where the sugar dispensers were always sticky, where the same three farmers argued about weather and crop prices every Tuesday morning at 7, and where the waitress knew your order before you sat down. Logan Pierce had eaten breakfast here 4 times a week for the past 3 years. He always took the same booth, the one in the far back corner against the wall, facing the door. A habit so deeply ingrained he didn't even think about it anymore. Some things you learn in places that try to kill you, and they never leave your body even when the danger is long gone. You sit where you can see everything. You keep your back to something solid. You notice who comes in, who leaves, who looks wrong. He'd ordered the same thing today as every other day. 2 eggs over easy, wheat toast, black coffee, orange juice for Danny. His son was 8 years old and currently in the process of destroying a short stack of pancakes with the kind of dedication that Logan had once applied to things considerably more serious. Danny had syrup on his left cheek, a gap in his front teeth where a new one was still growing in, and was mid-argument about whether dinosaurs could technically beat Navy ships if they were still alive. "They'd just, tip them over," Danny said, gesturing with his fork in a way that sent a small piece of pancake flying across the table. "The big ones. The T-Rex ones." "T-Rexes were land animals," Logan said. "They didn't go in the water." "But if they did, they'd sink. Their arms were too small to swim." Danny considered this with the gravity of a small person who has just had a very important theory challenged. "What about the long neck ones? Brachiosauruses?" "Yeah, those ones." Logan picked up his coffee. "Those ones were herbivores. They'd probably just eat the ship." "Ships aren't plants." "Tell that to a brachiosaurus." Danny burst out laughing. That uncontrolled kid laugh that comes from the belly and doesn't care who hears it, and Logan let himself smile quietly over the rim of his mug. These mornings were the best part of his week, maybe the best part of his life if he was honest with himself, which he tried to be at least some of the time. 3 years in Pine Ridge, 3 years of school pickups and garage invoices and burnt dinners and Saturday morning cartoons. 3 years of slow, deliberate normalcy that he had built piece by piece, like rebuilding an engine, carefully, methodically, with full knowledge that one wrong move could set the whole thing back. He had chosen this life on purpose. That was something people sometimes didn't understand. They looked at a man who'd been a Navy SEAL for 14 years, who'd done 2 combat deployments and 3 classified operations that he would never, under any circumstances, discuss at a diner in rural Virginia. And they assumed that a quiet life in a small town was a consolation prize, a retreat. Something you settled for. Logan didn't see it that way. He saw it as the only thing worth fighting for in the first place. He watched Danny argue with the pancakes and thought, not for the first time, about Emma, about how she'd looked in the hospital room, about the things she'd said in that last conversation that he'd replayed so many times it had worn smooth like a stone in his pocket. No sharp edges left, just the shape of it, the weight. "Don't let him grow up afraid of everything," she'd said. "And don't let yourself, either." He was working on it. He noticed the woman when she came through the door at 7:43, not because she was beautiful, though she was. Dark hair pulled back with the kind of careless efficiency that suggested she'd done it in under a minute without a mirror, but because of the way she moved. The wheelchair was manual, not electric. She pushed the wheels herself with practiced ease, maneuvering through Ruth Ann's narrow front section with a precision that told him she'd been doing it long enough that she stopped thinking about it. She wore a dark blazer over a simple shirt, no jewelry except small silver earrings, and she carried a laptop bag over one shoulder that looked heavy enough to throw someone's balance off. She didn't throw her balance. She took a table near the window, a regular table, not one of the accessible ones near the door, which meant she'd had to angle around two chairs and a standing display of local real estate brochures. And she set the bag down, pulled out a laptop, and opened it before the waitress even got to her. Logan observed this the way he observed most things, briefly, without appearing to look, then filed it and returned his attention to his son. "Can I get chocolate milk?" Danny asked. "You have orange juice." "I know, but—" "Finish the orange juice." Danny made a sound like a small, put-upon philosopher encountering an unjust universe, then drank his orange juice with aggressive pointedness. Logan refilled his own coffee from the carafe Patsy had left on the table and opened the small notebook he kept in his jacket pocket. Invoice from yesterday's brake job on the Henderson's truck. Part order he needed to call in before 10. Reminder to pick up Danny's prescription from the pharmacy on Oak Street. The bell above the door chimed. He looked up. Habit. 3 men came in. Logan assessed them in under 2 seconds, the way he always did with anyone who entered a space he was in. Mid-30s, expensive clothes that didn't quite fit right. The kind of clothes worn by people who recently acquired money and hadn't yet learned what good tailoring felt like. 2 of them were big. The third was shorter, and shorter men who walk next to big men for social reasons tend to overcompensate in other ways. They were loud before they'd even closed the door. Not fighting loud, not drunk loud, though it was barely past 7 in the morning. Something else. The specific kind of loud that comes from men who've never once had a reason to keep their voices down in a public space, because nothing in their lives has ever required it. They took a table, not one of the booths, the center table, the one that required everyone in the diner to hear every word they said. Logan returned to his notebook. For about 3 minutes, the noise they made was just background. Patsy took their order with the professionally blank expression she wore for customers she didn't like. The farmers in the front corner glanced over once and then made the collective decision not to engage. Then one of the big men, the one with a silver watch that caught the morning light, pushed back his chair and stood up. He walked toward the window table. Logan set down his pen. But the woman hadn't looked up from her laptop. She was reading something on the screen, one finger tracing a line of text, her brow slightly furrowed in the expression of someone working through a problem. She hadn't noticed the man approaching because she had no reason to expect that someone would approach her. This was a diner. People minded their own business. The man stopped next to her table. He didn't say anything immediately. He just stood there, close enough that his presence demanded she acknowledge him. She looked up. "You're in the way," he said. She glanced around the table, around herself, at the space between her and the window, the space between her and the wall. "I'm sorry?" "This table." He gestured broadly. "It's blocking the walkway." It wasn't. Anyone could see it wasn't. The walkway was 3 feet to his left, completely clear. "I don't think so," she started. "We need more room," the second big man said, standing now too. He'd appeared without Logan noticing which was unusual. Logan noticed things. But he'd been watching the woman's face, watching the shift in her expression as she understood what was happening, and he'd missed the movement. He corrected for that. He was watching everything now. "This is a public dining area," the woman said. Her voice was even, controlled, the kind of controlled that takes effort. "I have as much right to this table as anyone." "Yeah, but you're taking up more space," the shorter man said from his chair, smiling at the other 2, getting a reaction, pleased with himself. "Doesn't seem fair." Nobody in the diner said anything. The farmers looked at the table. 2 other customers found sudden interest in their phones. Patsy stood at the counter with a coffee pot in her hand and said nothing. Logan understood the silence. He'd seen it before, in different forms, in different places. It wasn't cowardice exactly. It was the kind of collective calculation that happens when people decide the cost of getting involved is higher than the cost of looking away. When the social math doesn't add up in favor of the person being targeted. He understood it. He didn't accept it. He slid out of the booth. "Danny," he said quietly. Stay here. Dad, eat your pancakes. He walked across the diner at a pace that was neither hurried nor slow. Deliberate. The kind of pace that announces intention without announcing aggression, because aggression was the wrong play here. Aggression would escalate, and escalation in a crowded diner with a child present was not something he was willing to allow. He stopped about 4 feet away from the two standing men, not close enough to be in their space, close enough that they had to look at him to ignore him. Problem, he said. The taller man, Silver Watch, looked at Logan the way men look at other men when they're trying to calculate something. He was big, yeah. He was used to being the biggest person in most rooms. But there was something about Logan that made the calculation take longer than it should have. Something in the way he stood, maybe. The complete and total absence of nervousness. This doesn't involve you, Silverwatch said. That table is blocking a public walkway, the second man added. We just... No, it isn't, Logan said. Flat, simple. Not an argument, just a correction of fact. Silverwatch blinked. What? The walkway is there, Logan pointed. 3 feet to your left. Clear path from the door to the counter. This table isn't blocking anything. A beat of silence. Like I said, Logan's voice didn't change. No problem here. The shorter man from the center table laughed. Man, mind your own. I'm having breakfast with my son, Logan said. And now he looked directly at the shorter man, and something in that look made the laugh stop mid-syllable. That's my business. What you're doing to this woman is also my business now, because I'm the one who decided to make it my business. That's how that works. He looked back at the two standing men. He looked at them without blinking. You should go sit down, he said. The moment stretched. Logan had been in enough situations to know what the next few seconds would determine. Men like these, men whose power came from other people's discomfort, from the accumulated experience of never facing real pushback, they were, in a specific way, fragile. Their confidence required an audience that played along. Take that away, change the social calculus of the room, and they were suddenly standing in open water with nothing to push off from. Silverwatch looked around the diner. The farmers were watching now, both of them, openly. One had set down his coffee. A woman near the door had put her phone on the table face down, which meant she was paying full attention. Patsy was still standing behind the counter, but her expression had changed. The professional blankness was gone. She was watching Logan the way someone watches a thing they weren't sure was going to happen but had privately hoped for. Silverwatch looked back at Logan. Whatever, he said. He sat down. The second man sat down. The shorter man looked like he wanted to say something else. Logan could see it in the way his mouth moved. But he looked at Logan's face one more time and made the correct decision, which was to say nothing. Logan stood there for another 3 seconds. Then he turned back to the table by the window. Up close, he could see the damage. While he'd been sleeping walking to the center of the diner, while he'd been watching Silverwatch and running calculations, the shorter man had done something on his way to the standing up theatrics. Or maybe it was beforehand. The timing didn't matter. The left wheel of the woman's chair was bent inward at an angle that shouldn't have been possible from normal use. The quick-release axle on that side had been forced, deliberately. He could see the marks. In a way that would make the chair pull hard left, and eventually become impossible to control properly at any speed. His jaw tightened, once, and then he let it go. Can I look at that? He said, crouching down to be at eye level rather than standing over her. She looked at him. Direct, assessing. Dark eyes that had probably spent a lot of time deciding how much to trust the next thing that happened to her. You're the mechanic, she said. Not a question. He glanced up. Sorry? I've seen your truck parked outside the garage on 5th, Pierce Auto. A brief pause. I live 2 streets over. Oh, he hadn't known that. Yeah, Logan Pierce. She looked at the wheel. Something moved across her face. Something controlled so quickly he almost missed it. Not fear, not embarrassment. Something more complicated than either of those. The specific expression of someone who has refused to let themselves break down in public so many times it's become automatic. Vivian Ashcroft, she said. Do you have a multi-tool, or I can go to the truck? Bag, she said. Front pocket. I carry a basic kit. He almost asked why, but he already knew why. You carry your own tools when you've learned not to wait for other people to have what you need. He unzipped the front pocket of the laptop bag. Inside, methodically organized in a small canvas roll, was a set of basic tools that would have looked at home in a decent garage. An adjustable wrench, a flathead and Phillips screwdriver, hex keys, a small ratchet set, and importantly, a spoke wrench that was almost exactly right for what he needed, though not quite. "This is a good kit," he said. I know. He went to work. The quick release axle was the main issue. Someone had deliberately cranked the cam mechanism past its normal range, which had put lateral stress on the axle itself. The bend in the wheel wasn't from the axle, it was from whoever had decided that shoving their foot against the side of the chair was a good use of their morning. The bend was bad, but not catastrophic. He could get it back to functional. Not perfect. He didn't have the right tools here for perfect, but functional. He worked quietly. He was good at working quietly. After a moment, Vivian said, "You don't have to do this. I know. I know you can." He looked up briefly. "I want to." She considered that, accepted it with a small nod. "The axle's going to need replacing," he said. "I can order the part, probably have it by Thursday. The wheel I can true up better in the shop, but this'll get you through today. I have a meeting at 9. This'll hold for longer than that." He finished what he could with what he had, then stood up and returned the tools to the canvas roll and zipped the bag closed. "Bring it by the garage whenever," he said. "I'll fix it properly, no charge." She looked at him again with that direct measuring look. "I can pay." "I know you can." He said it the same way he'd said the other thing, not dismissive, just simple. "I'm not doing it for payment." A short silence. "Why are you doing it?" she asked. Not suspicious exactly, more like someone who has learned to understand motivations before accepting help. Logan thought about that for a second. Honest thought, not the polite kind. "Because somebody should have done something," he said, "and nobody else was going to." He didn't wait for a response. He went back to his booth, where Danny had eaten every last bit of the pancakes and was now drawing a dinosaur on his napkin with what appeared to be a crayon he'd found somewhere. Logan didn't ask about the crayon. "Who was that?" Danny asked. "Neighbor." "The lady in the chair." "Yeah." Danny looked across the diner at Vivian, who had gone back to her laptop. "Is she okay?" Logan picked up his coffee. It had gone cold. He drank it anyway. "She will be," he said. "Damn." They left the diner at 8:15, Logan dropping Danny at school before driving back up 5th Street to open the garage. The morning light was doing that particular October thing where it came in low and gold and made even the ugly parts of a small Virginia town look like they were worth painting. The garage was a 2-bay setup, nothing fancy. He'd bought it from a man named Carl Briggs, who'd run it for 30 years and decided at 68 that his knees were telling him something he should probably listen to. It had taken Logan 18 months to pay off the purchase, and another 6 months to build the client list to where it covered the bills with enough left over to keep the lights on at home. He was not wealthy. He was comfortable, in the specific way that means I've made this work, and I don't have to panic. He pulled the bay door up, started the coffee maker in the small office in the back, and stood in the open door of the garage looking out at the street. Pine Ridge was a town of about 12,000 people. It had a hardware store, 2 churches, a volunteer fire department, a high school with a good wrestling team, and the particular social texture of a place where everyone knew just enough about everyone else to form opinions. It was the kind of town where people talked, which meant things got done, but also meant things got complicated, and the line between those two outcomes was thin and subject to negotiation. He'd chosen it partly because Emma had grown up 20 miles from here, and there had been something in him, irrational, he knew, that wanted Danny close to that geography. Like the land itself held something, like being within driving distance of the place where his mother had learned to ride a bike, mattered in a way he couldn't articulate. He'd also chosen it because it was small enough that strangers stood out, which meant he'd know if anything came looking for him. Nothing had. 3 years and nothing. He was starting, very cautiously, to believe that was permanent. He went inside and looked at the invoice book and thought about the brake job from yesterday, and the transmission work waiting in Bay 2, and the phone call he needed to make about the Henderson truck's part order. He thought about these things with the focused satisfaction of a man who has found meaning in the manageable. His phone buzzed. He looked at the screen. Unknown number. He didn't answer unknown numbers as a general rule. He let it go to voicemail. No voicemail. He set the phone down. Probably nothing. Spam call, wrong number, one of 1,000 mundane explanations. He went and started on the transmission. By noon, the truck in Bay 2 had new front pads and rotors, the part order was placed, and the Henderson transmission diagnostic had told him what he'd already suspected from the symptom description. Solenoid pack, possibly a secondary pressure issue, parts and labor coming in around $900, which was not what the Hendersons were going to want to hear. He was washing his hands in the shop sink, listening to the radio, when he heard the bell on the door. He came out from the back. Vivian Ashcroft was in the doorway. She'd changed since this morning. The blazer was gone, replaced by a worn fleece vest over a gray shirt, and she was pushing her laptop bag in her lap, which meant she'd come straight from somewhere or was on her way somewhere. He wasn't sure which. "I was in the neighborhood," she said. Then, with a small, dry expression, "I'm always in the neighborhood. I live here." He dried his hands on a shop rag. "You said that. 2 streets over. Maple. The Blue House?" She looked at him. "You know the Blue House?" "I fix a lot of cars on that block. Mrs. Kaminsky's Buick, the Patterson's van." He considered. "You've been there long?" "Almost 4 years." She rolled in a few feet, looking at the garage with the expression of someone who notices things. The organized tool wall, the parts shelving, the second bay with the truck halfway through a procedure. "You keep this place clean. Makes it easier to find things. Most garages don't bother. Most garages aren't run by someone who is trained by people who'd make you do push-ups for a misplaced wrench." He said it before thinking about it, and then didn't try to walk it back. It was already out there. She looked at him with fresh attention, not prying, more like a person who files things carefully. "Military. Navy. Long time?" 14 years. She absorbed this, didn't push it. He appreciated that. "I wanted to say thank you," she said, properly. "This morning was—" She paused. Reconsidered her word choice with the carefulness of someone who uses language precisely. "It's not the first time something like that has happened, but it's the first time someone stepped in." Logan leaned against the workbench. "That's the part that should bother people more, that it took someone stepping in at all." "Yes, but it still matters that you did." She met his eyes directly when she said it. No performance, just honest. "So, thank you." He nodded once. "You said you have a 9 o'clock meeting. How'd it go?" A brief pause. Something shifted in her expression, almost a smile, not quite. "I run a technology company remotely. The meeting was with my board of directors." "And?" "They approved the Q4 expansion, so—" "Fine. Good." He looked at the chair. "Bring it around to the second bay. I'll take a proper look at that axle. I've got time this afternoon." "I didn't come here for the chair." "I know. But you're here. And the chair's here. And Thursday is 2 days away." He gestured toward the bay. 20 minutes. I can at least assess it properly." She looked at him for a moment, the assessing look, the one that calculated things. 20 minutes, she said. It took 45. The chair was a quality manual chair, not the standard institutional kind, but something higher end, custom fitted, the kind that required a prescription and a clinical assessment and more money than most people spent on cars. And someone had done real damage to it. The wheel deformation was worse than he'd initially assessed, not from one hit, but from what looked like multiple separate incidents of deliberate force applied to the same point. This wasn't the first time someone had done this. He didn't say that out loud. He just worked, and she sat in one of the shop chairs he'd offered, laptop open, working on something that required all of her attention and none of her hands. At some point she said without looking up, "You're not going to ask." "Ask what?" "About the chair. About why I'm in it." He looked up from what he was doing. "Is it my business?" A pause. "No." "Then there's your answer." She looked at him then. The full attention look. He was starting to recognize it as something specific. The look she gave things she was deciding to take seriously. Most people ask, she said. Most people think their curiosity entitles them to things. He returned to the wheel. It doesn't. A longer silence, comfortable in the specific way that silences are when two people have independently decided to stop performing at each other. A car accident, she said eventually, 4 years ago. Someone ran a red light. A beat. I was going to a board meeting. Different board, different company, back when I worked in the city. I was in the intersection, and then I wasn't. And when I woke up in the hospital, my spine was saying things it was apparently going to keep saying for the rest of my life. Logan said nothing. He just worked. I came back here because... She stopped, started again. Because I grew up here. Because I needed to rebuild everything from scratch, and I needed somewhere that felt like a floor I already understood. A small exhale. And because the city felt like it was watching me, waiting to see if I was still useful. Are you? She looked at him with an expression he couldn't immediately read. Yes, she said. Then the city's problem, not yours. She was quiet for a moment. You say simple things. Things usually are simple, he said. We just don't like them to be. He handed her back the chair, properly adjusted now, the wheel trued as well as he could without the replacement axle, the frame checked for stress points, the quick release mechanism reset to spec. Thursday, he said. I'll have the axle. Probably an hour's work. I'll pay for the parts at least. He gave her the cost. She wrote him a check, which surprised him slightly. He hadn't expected a check, had expected Venmo or a card, and then he looked at the check and saw that she'd added $50. For your time, she said, before he could say anything. He considered arguing, decided it wasn't worth the argument. See you Thursday, he said. She pushed herself toward the door, then stopped, without turning around. The farmers at the diner, Hector and Ray. They've been coming every Tuesday for 19 years. They could have said something this morning. Yeah, Logan said, but you're not from here. You haven't been here long enough to know you're supposed to look away. He thought about that. Maybe, he said. Or maybe I just don't care about the rule. She turned around at that, just slightly. He could see the edge of that almost smile again. Maybe, she agreed. Then she was through the door and out onto the sidewalk, moving with that practiced efficiency in the October afternoon light, laptop bag over her shoulder, and Logan stood in the mouth of the garage watching her go with the thoughtful expression of a man who has just met something he wasn't expecting. His phone buzzed again. Unknown number. He let it ring. That evening, after he'd picked up Danny from the after-school program and made dinner, pasta, serviceable but nothing remarkable, which was the best that could be said for most of his cooking, and after Danny had done his homework and argued about it, and then done it anyway, and then gone to bed with a complaint about the unfairness of 8:30 bedtimes, Logan sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea he didn't particularly want and his notebook open to a blank page. He didn't write anything. He just sat with the blank page for a while. The house was the second thing he'd bought in Pine Ridge, after the garage. It was a narrow 2-story on Birch Street that needed work when he bought it, and still needed some work now, though considerably less. He'd replaced the porch boards in his first summer. New water heater the following spring. The kitchen was still running on cabinets that were older than he was, but they worked, and Logan had a fairly high threshold for things that worked without being beautiful. He thought about the diner, about the 3 men and the silence in the room, about the way Vivian Ashcroft had held her face very still while someone tried to humiliate her. He'd seen a lot of different kinds of courage in his life, some of them loud and visible, people who ran toward things, who made decisions in the half-second before consequence catches up. But the kind that impressed him most, that had always impressed him most, was the quiet kind. The kind that was just staying, just not breaking, just deciding, again and again, in small, unremarkable moments, that you weren't going to let it win. He thought she'd been doing that for a long time. He drank his tea and closed the notebook and thought about the unknown number, which was probably nothing. Thought about the way the wheel of her chair had been damaged, not randomly, not carelessly, but purposefully, in a pattern that suggested someone who'd done it before or had thought about how to do it beforehand. He turned the lamp off and sat in the dark kitchen for a minute, listening to the house settle around him. He thought about the fact that he'd lived 2 streets away from this woman for 3 years and never once knocked on her door. He got up, rinsed his mug, and went to bed. Thursday came. She came to the garage at 10 in the morning, punctual. He'd ordered the correct axle. He'd looked up the chair model after she left Tuesday, tracked down the manufacturer's specifications, and ordered through the medical supply distributor rather than a general parts source, which got him the exact OEM component rather than an aftermarket substitute. He noticed her noticing that when he pulled out the part. "You looked it up," she said. "Wanted to get it right." She handed over the chair without argument this time, settled into the folding chair in Bay 2 the same way she had Tuesday, and opened her laptop. They worked in comfortable parallel for most of the hour. Him with the axle. Her with whatever occupied the kind of mind that built a technology company from scratch while running it from a small town in Virginia. At some point she said, without preamble, "Have you heard of Grant Holloway?" Logan looked up. "Real estate. Development." She was looking at her screen. "He's been buying properties on this block and on Birch. Birch Street. His street. I haven't had anyone contact me," he said. "You will." Still looking at the screen, but her voice had gone slightly tighter than its usual register. "He started on my end of Maple 3 months ago. He's moving west. Bought 4 properties already, offered on 2 more. A pause. "He wants the whole corridor, something commercial. High-end retail probably, or mixed use with luxury condos." Logan set down the axle wrench. "What's on this corridor that's worth developing?" "The street itself," she said simply. "Old-growth neighborhood, 2 blocks from downtown, walking distance to the park. The bones are good. Holloway isn't stupid. He knows the zoning potential. He just needs enough contiguous properties to make the project viable." She finally looked up. "He needs mine. He'll need yours. And when people say no..." Something crossed her face. A careful expression, the kind you wear when you're deciding how specific to be. "He's creative," she said, "about finding other ways to make people reconsider." Logan picked the wrench back up. He worked for a moment in silence. "How long have you been dealing with this?" he said. "Since July." 4 months. He started with a very polite offer letter, then a less polite one. Then an inspector showed up and found violations that my contractor, who built this chairlift, this ramp, the whole accessible interior, says are manufactured. Her voice didn't waver, but her hand, resting on the keyboard, pressed slightly harder than necessary. "They're going to cost me around $60,000 to remediate. For violations my contractor insists don't exist." Logan thought about the unknown phone calls. About 2 calls from an unknown number in the space of 2 mornings. He didn't say anything yet. He wasn't sure enough to say anything yet. "You should talk to a lawyer," he said. "I have a lawyer." Dry, very dry. "She says the inspections are technically within the city's authority to order, and contesting them is expensive and slow." A pause. "She's right." He finished the axle installation, checked the seating, tested the quick release 3 times. He then trued the wheel properly, the full procedure, which took longer than the axle. And when he was done, the chair rolled the way it should, smooth, responsive, no pull. He handed it back to her. She transferred from the folding chair with the practiced movement of someone for whom this was just a thing they did. Not a performance, not a demonstration, just a physical requirement of their life. He didn't offer to help. She didn't ask him to. She pushed the chair back and forth once, testing it. "That's right," she said quietly. "Axle's good. Wheel is true. You should get a long time out of both if nothing else happens to them." He looked at her. "You should also file a report with the police about Tuesday, about what those men did to the chair." Something in her expression flickered. "You think they're connected to Holloway?" "I don't think anything yet." She held his gaze. But I noticed," he said simply, "that someone who wanted you to feel unwelcome in this neighborhood and wanted to make your daily life harder would have done exactly what those men did this morning." A long silence in the garage. Outside, a car passed on 5th Street. The radio in the back office was playing something quietly. "I'll file the report," she said. "Good." He stepped back. "And if anything else happens, Anything that makes you think it's not a coincidence, I'm 2 streets over. She looked at him for a moment, the full attention look. Birch Street, she said. Number 22. Gray truck in the driveway. She nodded. Not grateful exactly. Or not just grateful. Something more balanced than that. Like someone who has learned to accept help when it's genuine without making more of it than it is. Thank you, Logan, she said. He watched her leave the garage and roll up 5th Street toward Maple, moving with that same particular efficiency through the Thursday morning light. His gray truck was parked at the curb, and it occurred to him that she'd driven past it how many times over the past 4 years. How many times had they been in approximate proximity without a single interaction between them, and it had taken 3 strangers with bad intentions and a bent wheel to change that. The unknown number called again. He answered it this time. Silence on the other end. Then a mechanical click, the kind you got from a spoofed line, and the call dropped. He stood in the mouth of the garage with his phone in his hand, listening to Pine Ridge go about its ordinary morning, and felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years. A particular quality of attention that meant something wasn't right, that the edges of things needed watching. He went back inside. He had work to do. The letter arrived on a Monday. Logan found it between a water bill and a coupon mailer, which was either a coincidence or a deliberate choice by whoever sent it to make it look ordinary. The envelope was white, business-sized, no return address, just his name and the garage address printed in clean sans-serif font that looked like it had come off a professional printer, not a home setup. He opened it at the shop counter while the coffee was still brewing. Pierce Auto Repair. Notice of Zoning Compliance Review. The letter was from something called the Pine Ridge Office of Commercial Standards, which Logan had never heard of, and which he was fairly certain had not existed 6 months ago. It cited 3 specific code violations: improper waste disposal documentation, insufficient fire suppression equipment in Bay 2, and, this one was his favorite, inadequate pedestrian accessibility accommodations for the public-facing entrance. The pedestrian entrance was a flat concrete apron 6 feet wide. It had no steps. A person in a wheelchair could roll in without slowing down. He'd checked when he bought the place because he'd read enough about accessibility requirements to know it mattered. He read the letter twice. Then he folded it, put it in the drawer under the counter where he kept documents that needed attention, and went and poured his coffee. He called his accountant, Dale Pruitt, who also did contract work for 2 other small business owners on the block, and asked if Dale had heard anything about a zoning compliance review. Got a similar letter, Dale said, sent to the sandwich place on the corner. Nora called me about it last week. Different violations, same office. Same office that nobody's heard of? Yeah, I looked it up. It's real. It was established under a county administrative order about 8 months ago, but it hasn't done much until recently. A pause on the line. You had any contact from Grant Holloway's people? Logan was quiet for a second. Not directly. Nora had a guy come by, made an offer on the sandwich shop. She said no, and 2 weeks later the letter showed up. Dale's voice carried the particular tone of a man who has figured out what he's looking at and doesn't like it. I'm not saying they're connected, I'm just telling you the sequence. I appreciate that, Logan said. He hung up and stood in the garage looking at Bay 2. His fire suppression equipment was current. He'd had it serviced 8 months ago and had the paperwork to prove it. The waste disposal documentation was in a binder on the office shelf, organized by quarter, going back to when he'd bought the place from Carl Briggs. The violations weren't real. He knew that before he even checked. But contesting them, that was a different conversation. That meant time and forms and possibly a lawyer and the specific exhausting process of proving a negative to people who were paid to make the process as exhausting as possible. He understood now what Vivian had meant when she'd said Grant Holloway was creative. He saw her that Saturday at the farmer's market on the square, which ran through October and which Danny had discovered sold a specific variety of apple cider donut that he would, if given the chance, eat himself into unconsciousness over. Logan had learned to buy them in limited quantities and distribute them strategically throughout the morning. Vivian was near the vegetable stands, talking to a woman Logan recognized as one of the local farmers, Carol Reyes, who grew heirloom tomatoes and had very strong opinions about soil pH. They were mid-conversation, and Vivian was nodding with the attentiveness of someone who was actually listening and not just waiting for her turn to talk. He almost didn't approach. He wasn't entirely sure what the protocol was. They'd had 2 interactions, one of which involved fixing her property, and one of which involved her warning him about a property developer, and neither of those naturally produced a blueprint for how you say hello at a farmer's market. Danny had no such uncertainty. He walked directly up to Vivian's wheelchair and said, "Are you the lady from the diner?" Vivian looked down at him. Something in her face shifted. Not dramatically, just a small adjustment, the way people's expressions change when a child addresses them directly without preamble. "I am," she said. "My dad fixed your chair." "He did." Danny considered this. "He's good at fixing things. He fixed my bike too. And the dishwasher. And the—" He looked back at Logan, who had arrived behind him with the expression of a man who has learned to let certain things run their course. "What else did you fix?" "The furnace," Logan said. "The porch? The back fence." "And my bike," Danny confirmed, turning back to Vivian. "Do you live near here?" "About 2 blocks," she said. "We live on Birch." He was looking at the wheelchair with the frank curiosity of an 8-year-old who has not yet learned that you're supposed to pretend not to notice things. "Does it go fast?" "Danny," Logan said. "It's okay," Vivian said. And she meant it. He could tell she meant it by the absence of any performance in it. She looked at Danny. "It goes as fast as I push it, which is pretty fast." Danny's eyes went slightly wider, upgrading his opinion of the situation. "Like a race?" "Like a race," she agreed. Carol Reyes, who had been watching this exchange with the expression of someone who finds people genuinely entertaining, excused herself to attend to a customer. Vivian tilted her head slightly toward Logan. "The letter came." "Mine too," he said. "Monday. Accessibility violation? Pedestrian access. Bay 2 fire suppression. Waste disposal." She made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "Mine was structural. Inspector said my addition, the accessible bathroom and the widened doorways, has foundation issues." A beat. "The same contractor who built it, Patrick Shields, has been doing construction in this county for 22 years. He pulled the permits correctly, he passed all inspections at the time, and he's never had a structural complaint." "Has he seen the report?" "He has." Her voice stayed even. "He said, and I'm quoting directly, that the specific issues cited would require the foundation to have been poured incorrectly from the beginning, which he can demonstrate it was not, because he has photographs from every stage of the pour." She paused. "He was angry. Patrick doesn't get angry easily." Logan bought a bag of apples from a nearby stand because Danny had wandered over to look at them and was giving him the look that communicated parental negotiation was in progress. He handed over the correct amount of cash and gave Danny the bag to carry, which was a tactic that worked for approximately the next 4 minutes before Danny decided the bag was heavy and Logan should carry it. "I got a call from a man named Brent Sellers," Vivian continued. "He represents Holloway's acquisition team. He left a message, very polite, very professional, saying he understood I'd received some concerning regulatory correspondence and that his client's offer was still available and remained, in his words, generous given current complications." "What did you do?" "I didn't call back." Logan nodded. "Good. For now." She said it with self-awareness, not defeat. "It's an ongoing calculation. The structural remediation, if I can't contest it, comes to around $80,000. She looked at him sideways. "That's not a number I can ignore forever." "Then we don't ignore it," he said. "We fight it." She looked at him with a mix of something, not skepticism, but the careful version of hope that people develop when they've been disappointed by the word "we" before. When they've learned that people who say "we" often mean you, with my verbal encouragement from a safe distance. "You got your own letter," she said. "I did." "That's your fight." "It's probably the same fight," Logan said, "right? Which makes it more efficient to not do it separately." Danny had found a small dog tied to a stand leg and was crouching down to let it sniff his hand, completely removed from the adult conversation happening 3 feet away. Logan watched him for a second. "I have a lawyer I trust," he said. "Family friend. She's in Roanoke. She does civil matters, property disputes, administrative law. I'd like you to talk to her." "I have my own lawyer." "I know. Keep her. But talk to mine too. He looked at Vivian. Her name is Frances Webb. She's blunt, she's not cheap, and she doesn't tell you what you want to hear. A pause. I think you'd like her. Vivian considered this for a moment. Considered him, specifically, with that particular attention she gave to things she was deciding about. Okay, she said. He wrote Frances's number on the back of a receipt from the apple stand. Vivian took it and put it in the side pocket of her bag without looking at it, the way you treat a number when you're going to remember to call it. The second incident happened on a Wednesday night. Logan was asleep, or most of the way asleep, that particular stage where you're aware of drifting down towards something and your body has stopped arguing about it, when his phone lit up the bedside table at 12:47 in the morning. It was a text from a number he didn't recognize, which had become, over the past 2 weeks, a different category of occurrence than it had been before. He was awake before he consciously decided to be. The text read, "Your neighbor's chair got broke again. Thought you should know." He lay there in the dark for 3 seconds. Then he got up, pulled on jeans and a jacket, checked on Danny, deep asleep, sprawled sideways across his bed with one arm hanging off the edge in a way that defied structural logic, and went downstairs. He drove the 2 blocks to Maple Street. The porch light at the blue house was on. He could see from the street that the front door was slightly open, the inner door behind the screen, which meant either Vivian was awake, or she hadn't locked up properly, or something else. He parked, went to the front door, and knocked. A pause. Then, "Who's there?" "Logan Pierce. I got a text. I'm sorry for the hour." A longer pause. Then the sound of movement inside, and then Vivian opened the screen door and he could see immediately that she was awake, and that she'd been awake for a while. She was in a plain gray t-shirt and sweatpants, no blazer, no careful presentation of herself, just a person who'd been awake at 1 in the morning with a problem. The manual chair wasn't the one he'd fixed. It was a backup, simpler, slightly older. The repaired chair was visible through the open interior doorway, leaning against the wall in a way that meant it wasn't functional. "You got a text," she said flatly. "Yes." "From who?" "Don't know. Same kind of spoofed number I've been getting calls from." He looked at the chair against the wall. "Can I see it?" She moved aside. He went in. The house was exactly what he might have expected from someone who rebuilt their space with full intentional precision. Wider doorways, lever handles on every door, smooth transitions between surfaces, no thresholds, pull-out shelving in the kitchen visible through the open doorway, a custom desk set up in what looked like a home office off the hall. It was functional in the way that beautiful things are functional when they've been built by someone who took the time to think through every detail. It was also a person's home. There were books stacked impractically on every flat surface, a coffee mug on the desk with something still in it, shoes near the door that weren't neatly paired, a kid's drawing tacked to the kitchen wall, which caught him off guard until he remembered she must know neighbors with children. The chair was bad, worse than the diner. This had been done deliberately and with more time available, so someone had accessed the chair, which meant they'd been on her property, and they'd done methodical damage. The right rear wheel this time, the frame joint at the back corner stressed in a way that was going to require replacement rather than repair, and the seat cushion, which was custom fitted, which was medical equipment, had been sliced with something along the underside seam. He crouched and looked at it. He didn't touch it yet. "Did you call the police?" he said. "Not yet. I found it about an hour ago. I was working late, and when I went to transfer to it, I could tell something was wrong. I wasn't sure what to do." She said this in a practical tone, not an emotional one, but her hands were resting in her lap with a stillness that he recognized as controlled rather than calm. "We need to document this before anyone touches it," he said. "Photos first, then the police report." He looked at her. "Do you have a camera or just the phone?" "Just the phone. It's fine. High resolution." "Okay. You take the photos. You know the chair better than I do. Document everything before we move it." He stood up. "Is there a back entrance to the property? Gate? Side yard?" "Side gate on the left. It was latched, not locked." He went and looked. The gate was simple, the kind with a thumb latch on top that you could reach over and open from outside. No damage to the latch. No forced entry. Someone had just reached over and opened it, like any other person walking through a gate. He came back inside. Vivian had her phone out and was taking photographs with a steady, methodical attention. Angles, distances, close-ups of specific points of damage. She didn't need to be told how to do it. She'd probably been careful about documenting things since the inspection started. "I'll call the non-emergency line," he said. "Unless you want to. You call." A brief pause. "I don't want to sound—" She stopped. He understood what she wasn't finishing. He'd heard the version of this thought before, from other people in other contexts. The specific hesitation that comes from knowing that your emotional state will be assessed alongside your report, that being too upset or too calm or too anything will color how the response lands. "I'll call," he said. The officer who came was young, mid-20s, knew enough that his uniform still looked slightly stiff, and his name was Patterson, which Logan noted because he had a distinct and separate Patterson on Birch Street, and he wanted to keep them straight. This Patterson was polite, took the report carefully, photographed the damage himself, and wrote down everything Logan said about the text message and the prior incident at the diner. When Logan mentioned that this connected to a pattern of pressure from Grant Holloway's acquisition campaign, Patterson wrote it down and said he'd note it in the report. His expression was carefully neutral in the way of someone who had been taught to be neutral, not someone who was naturally so. After he left, Logan and Vivian sat in her kitchen because she'd offered coffee and he'd accepted, and it was almost 2 a.m. and neither of them were going back to sleep immediately. The kitchen was clean. There was a rack of herbs in the window that had been there long enough to be thriving rather than experimental. She had a good coffee maker, not a fancy one, just a good one that produced decent coffee and had the dents of regular use. She pushed a mug across the table to him. "You fixed my chair twice," she said, "and now you're in my kitchen at 2 a.m. "Seems like it. We've known each other about 2 weeks. "About that." She wrapped both hands around her own mug. She had capable hands. He'd noticed that before in the garage, the way she held her tools. "I'm not usually, She considered her phrasing carefully. "I don't typically let people in this quickly." "Neither do I," he said. She looked at him. He looked back. The particular honesty of 2 people in the middle of the night when the performance of daylight has worn off. "I don't know what Holloway's people are willing to do," she said. "I've been telling myself the inspections are administrative pressure, legal, if unfair, that they won't cross certain lines." She stopped. "But someone was in my yard tonight." "Yeah." "That's a different thing than a letter." "Yeah," he said again. "It is." She drank her coffee, looked at the window above the sink. "Do you have security cameras?" "At the garage. Not at the house yet. I've been meaning to install them here. I kept putting it off because—" A small exhale. "Because installing them felt like admitting something I didn't want to admit. That someone might actually come onto your property. That I was a person things happened to," she said. And then, with the precision of someone who says what they mean, "I spent 4 years rebuilding everything after the accident so that I could be a person who does things, not a person who has things done to her." A beat. Cameras felt like giving up a version of that. Logan thought about that for a moment, about the particular stubbornness of deciding your own narrative. "Cameras are just information," he said. "That's all they are. They don't change who you are." She considered this, not dismissing it, actually considering it. "I'll help you install them," he said. "If you want. I've got a system at the garage I'm happy with. You don't have to—" "I know, but it's a practical thing that needs doing, and I can do it, so." He shrugged. "Weekend?" She looked at him for a long moment. Then something in her face, not softened exactly, but adjusted, like a person allowing themselves to acknowledge that something is genuinely okay. "Weekend." She said. Prass said. He installed the cameras on Sunday while Danny was at a friend's birthday party, the elaborate kind at a place with laser tag, which Danny had been talking about for 11 days with escalating excitement. So Logan felt reasonably confident he'd be occupied for the duration. Vivian made them both lunch while he ran the wiring. She worked at her kitchen table at the same time, which he'd noticed was something she did. She didn't stop working for the sake of social politeness. She just included the other person in the space and let the work run in parallel. He found it easy to be around. He was the same way. They ate at the table with laptops and tools and sandwich wrappers spread across the surface in an arrangement that would have horrified people who valued tidiness, but was, practically speaking, very functional. "Tell me about the company," he said. She glanced up. "Why?" "Because you've been working for the entire time I've been here, and I'm curious." A short pause. She decided to answer. "Software infrastructure. We build back-end systems for mid-size healthcare companies. The part nobody sees that makes the part people do see actually function." She ate her sandwich without any apparent concern for whether this description was impressive or not. "I started it after the accident. I was in the city, I was a VP at a tech firm, and when I came back here, I had about 6 months where I basically didn't function. A direct statement of fact, no apology attached. And then I got bored. And then I got angry. And then I started building something because that was the one thing I knew how to do when I was angry." "What were you angry at?" She was quiet for a second. "At how long it took me to figure out I was still the same person." Another pause. "At how many people treated me like I wasn't." Logan ate his sandwich. Outside, a car passed on Maple Street. The cameras were live now. He could see the feeds on his phone, all 4 angles of the property's exterior. "The former company you worked for," he said carefully. "After the accident, did they—" "They were very supportive," Vivian said, in a tone that communicated supportive was doing a great deal of heavy lifting as a word. "They offered me a modified role. Part-time. Different scope. Less responsibility." She looked at her laptop screen. It was framed as accommodation. It was actually them deciding I was less than I'd been before. Her voice didn't crack. It didn't need to because the steadiness of it said everything the crack would have. "I quit within the month. And then you built the thing. And then I built the thing." A very small smile. "It's worth about $40 million now, on a good quarter." Logan absorbed this without reacting particularly. "And you chose to run it from here." "I chose to run it from here," she confirmed. "I built the house the way I needed it. I know the streets, I know where the curb cuts are and where they aren't." She glanced at him. "That sounds smaller than it is." "No, it doesn't," he said. "It sounds exactly like what it is." She looked at him for a moment. Then she went back to her laptop. They worked in silence for a while. Comfortable silence, the kind that doesn't need filling. "My wife died," Logan said. Not planning to say it. Just, it came out because they were being honest, and it felt like dishonest to not be. 3 years ago, 4 years before that she was sick, and then she wasn't sick anymore, and then she died. Vivian put down her sandwich. "Danny was 4, he said. The last year was—" He stopped, regrouped. "She knew I joined the Navy at 22 partly to get away from something I never dealt with, and she spent 11 years very quietly and very persistently making me deal with it. And when she was gone, the only thing I could think was that I owed it to her to be the person she'd made me into." He picked up his coffee. "So I left the Navy, came here, bought a garage." A pause. "It's not heroic." "No," Vivian said. "It's not." She said it honestly, not unkindly. "It's just what you did." A moment. "What was her name?" "Emma." She nodded. "She sounds like someone who paid attention." "Yeah," Logan said. "She really did." The following Tuesday, he came to the garage and found an envelope taped to the bay door. Not delivered by mail, just taped there. No postage, no envelope marking, just his name in the same clean printed font as the compliance letter. Inside was a single card, the size of a business card but plain white, and on it was printed, "The offer on the adjacent property at 22 Birch Street expires November 15th. Final notice before escalation. Adjacent property. His property. 22 Birch Street." He stood in the cold morning air reading the card twice. Then he took a photo of it, of the envelope, and of the bay door where it had been attached, including the small piece of clear tape still stuck to the metal. He put the card in the same drawer as the compliance letter. Then he called Francis Webb in Roanoke. Francis was 61, had been practicing civil and administrative law for 34 years, and had what Logan's late father-in-law used to call no nonsense to burn, meaning she had accumulated so much of it over the decades that she could distribute it freely and never run short. "Someone put an unsigned card on your property with a coercive message," she said when he'd finished explaining. That's what it looks like, yes. And the compliance letters are timed to the refusal of a purchase offer from the same developer. That's the pattern, yes. Does the developer have connections in the county government that would give him access to the Office of Commercial Standards? I don't know yet, Logan said, but I'd like to find out. You and me both, Francis said. I want copies of everything. The compliance letters, the card, the photos. I want the name of the inspector who came to Vivian Ashcroft's property and the name of the organization that sent the letter to you. A pause. And Logan? Yeah. Stay calm. Don't do anything dramatic. When do I do dramatic things? I mean it. These situations escalate when someone does something emotional that gives the other side a legal angle. Her voice was dry, professional, also caring in the specific way of people who know you well enough to say the harder thing. I know how you're built. Just document and wait. I'm documenting, he said. Good, and tell your neighbor the same. He told Vivian that afternoon. She was in his garage, but she'd started coming by in the late afternoons when she finished her workday. Not every day, but regularly enough that he'd started making sure there was decent coffee. She'd pointed out once, pragmatically, that talking on the phone required her to stop working, and that talking in person while he worked on cars and she sat with her laptop was considerably more efficient. He hadn't argued with the logic. November 15th, she repeated. That's 3 weeks. 3 weeks before their deadline, he said. Not ours. She looked at him. What does Frances say? She says document everything and don't do anything dramatic. Good advice. She also wants to know if Holloway has connections inside the county government. Vivian's expression shifted, the very subtle shift that told him she'd thought of something. I know someone who might know, she said slowly. Miles Donovan. The sheriff? He was 2 years ahead of me in high school. We're not close, but we're not strangers either. She was thinking through something. He could tell by the particular stillness she got. He came by the house about a month ago. Knocked on the door, said he wanted to make sure everything was all right, that he'd heard there were some inspections on the block. A beat. It felt like he was checking on something more specific than general community welfare. Did he say anything else? He said, she paused. He said to call him if anything felt wrong. And he said it in the specific way that means he's already thinking something feels wrong. Logan wiped his hands on the shop rag. He thought about Sheriff Miles Donovan, who he'd seen around town without knowing him personally, who had a reputation among Pine Ridge's small business community for being fair-minded and not particularly political, which in a county where the sheriff's office intersected heavily with local politics was either admirable or naive, and he'd never been sure which. Call him, Logan said, but about the card on your bay door? About all of it. Tell him everything from the beginning. The inspections, the offers, the diner, the wheelchair, the card. He looked at her. If he came to check on you a month ago, he already has a reason to be paying attention. Give him more to work with. Vivian was quiet for a moment. He knew she was running the same calculation he'd run. The one about trust, about who you let into the problem and how far, about the specific risk of involving official channels when you weren't sure whose side the official channels were on. Okay, she said. He went back to the car he was working on. After a minute, she opened her laptop and started typing something, and he heard her say quietly and without any drama in her voice, I hate that this is what my Tuesday looks like. Yeah, he said. I had a product launch call at 9 this morning, board presentation at 11. This afternoon, I was supposed to be reviewing a contract for a new client in Baltimore. She said this not as complaint exactly, but as inventory, the accounting of a life that was being made smaller by someone else's agenda. Instead, I'm sitting in a garage thinking about property law and intimidation tactics. Logan said nothing for a moment. He was underneath the car and his voice came up slightly muffled. Does the Baltimore contract look good? A beat. Then, despite herself, a short sound that was definitely something close to a laugh. Yes, it looks very good. Then hold on to that, he said. That's the real thing. This other stuff is noise we're going to deal with. You sound very certain. I'm not, he said honestly, but I found that useful. She went back to typing. He went back to the car. Outside on 5th Street, the afternoon was going gold, the light doing that thing again, and a kid on a bicycle rode past the open garage door, and the bell on the bike made a small bright sound that carried through the autumn air, and Logan lay under the car thinking about November 15th, and about photographs of property damage, and about a woman in a blue house 2 streets over who had been fighting a quiet, careful war for months before he'd walked across a diner to help with a bent wheel, and who was still fighting it, and who was not going to stop. Neither, he decided, was he. Miles Donovan came to the blue house on a Thursday evening, which told Logan something before the man even opened his mouth. Sheriffs who make casual wellness checks do them during business hours. Sheriffs who come at 6:30 on a Thursday evening, after the office has closed and after most of the town has moved from public to private hours, are coming as something other than the official version of themselves. Logan was on Vivian's porch when the cruiser pulled up. He'd been there for 20 minutes, helping her look at the camera footage from the previous week, trying to identify whether anyone had come close to the property before the wheelchair incident. The footage was inconclusive. Someone had passed the side gate twice in one evening, but the angle was wrong and the light was bad, and all they could confirm was that the person was male and unhurried, which described roughly half the population of Pine Ridge. Donovan got out of the cruiser in civilian clothes, dark jacket, jeans, the specific body language of a man who wants it understood that he is not here officially. He was in his mid-40s with the broad build of someone who'd played high school football and never entirely lost it, and the careful eyes of someone who'd spent 20 years watching people decide whether to tell him the truth. He looked at Logan on the porch and stopped at the foot of the steps. "You must be Pierce," he said. "I am." Donovan looked at Vivian. "I got your message." "Come in," she said. They sat in her kitchen, which by this point Logan had started to think of as the room where the actual conversations happened, because every significant exchange between them had occurred at that table with mugs of something and the particular quality of attention that small kitchens produced. Donovan refused coffee, accepted water, and set both hands flat on the table in the manner of a man who has decided he's going to say a specific thing and is organizing himself to say it. "Before you tell me what you called about," he said to Vivian, "I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to understand that I'm telling you as Miles Donovan, who went to Pine Ridge High School, not as the county sheriff, because the county sheriff has certain obligations about what he does with information, and right now I'm not sure who I can trust inside those obligations." Vivian put down her mug. Logan went very still in the way he did when information was coming that required full attention. "All right," Vivian said. Donovan took a breath. 6 weeks ago, I was doing a routine review of closed case files. We do it quarterly, looking for procedural gaps, anything that needs follow-up before statute limitations run. Standard admin. He looked at the table. I pulled a file from 4 years ago. Motor vehicle accident at the intersection of Route 11 and Crawford Avenue. November 17th. Driver of a blue sedan ran a red light at approximately 42 miles per hour and struck a vehicle proceeding lawfully through the intersection. The kitchen went very quiet. Vivian's face did something Logan couldn't entirely read. It went through several things in rapid succession, landing on a careful, controlled stillness that he now recognized as her version of emergency management. "That's my accident," she said. "Yes," Donovan said. "It is." He looked at her directly. The case was closed 14 months after the accident. The driver was cited for failure to obey a traffic signal. Fined. No criminal charges. Case closed. He paused. The original investigating officer was Phil Kearney, who retired 2 years ago. I called him to ask some follow-up questions, and he was... Another pause, choosing words carefully. He was unwilling to discuss it. "Unwilling," Logan said. He said the file was complete and accurate and he had nothing to add, and then he ended the call. Donovan looked at Logan. Phil Kearney was a thorough officer for 19 years. I worked under him for 6 of them. He was not a man who said a file was complete when he thought it wasn't. He looked back at Vivian. So I read the file again, more carefully. He reached into his jacket and produced a folded paper, which he put on the table without unfolding it. He left his hand on top of it. The witness statement log shows 3 witnesses, 2 provided statements. The third is logged as contacted, no statement provided. Which is normal. Not everyone will give a statement. He tapped the folded paper. But in the original evidence intake log, which is a separate document filed by a different officer, there are 4 witnesses listed. The 4th name doesn't appear in the witness statement log at all. Not as contacted, not as declined, just gone. The word sat there in the kitchen. Vivian said very quietly, "Who was the fourth witness?" "A man named Gerald Pruitt. He ran a landscaping company. He was parked at the gas station on the corner of Route 11 and Crawford when the accident happened." Donovan finally unfolded the paper. It was a photocopy. Logan could see the evidence intake log, handwritten entries, a fourth line with a name and a vehicle plate number. "I looked him up. Gerald Pruitt sold his landscaping business and moved to North Carolina 8 months after your accident. I've been trying to reach him for 3 weeks." "What happened with the driver?" Logan asked. "The one who ran the light." Donovan looked at him steadily. "His name was Carter Holloway. He was 24 years old at the time of the accident." A beat. "Grant Holloway's younger brother." Nobody said anything for a moment. Logan thought about the compliance letters, about the card taped to his bay door, about the bent wheel of Vivian's chair, once in a crowded diner and once in the dark of her own yard, about the shape of a campaign of pressure designed to force 2 people out of their homes, directed at least partly at the woman sitting across this table from him, who had once been hit at a busy intersection by a drunk 24-year-old in his older brother's shadow, and who had been living with the consequences of that ever since. "The settlement," Vivian said. Her voice was controlled, but he could hear the effort in it. "I accepted a civil settlement 14 months after the accident. It was confidential. I was told—" She stopped. "I was told the evidence supported only civil liability, not criminal, that the driver's intoxication level was below the criminal threshold at the time of the blood test." "When was the blood test administered?" Logan asked. Donovan looked at him with the expression of a man who's been waiting for the right question. 2 hours and 40 minutes after the accident. The number sat there doing its work. Logan had spent 14 years in environments where the difference between what the record said and what actually happened was the difference between operational success and catastrophic failure. He knew exactly what 2 hours and 40 minutes meant in terms of blood alcohol metabolism. He knew what it meant that the test had not been administered at the scene. He knew what it meant that a witness had been present in the evidence intake log and absent from the follow-up documentation. "Somebody waited," he said. "That's what it looks like," Donovan said. "I can't prove it yet. The blood test results in the file are what they are. I can't change the numbers, and I can't establish through the file alone that there was deliberate delay. But the missing witness," he tapped the photocopy. "If Gerald Pruitt saw Carter Holloway's condition at the scene before the blood test was administered, his account would be the independent corroboration that the file doesn't have." Vivian hadn't moved. She was looking at the photocopy on her table with the expression of someone encountering a thing they have suspected in some formless way for a long time and are now watching take on specific shape. "I signed a confidential settlement," she said. "The confidentiality covers the settlement terms. It doesn't cover evidence of criminal conduct or official misconduct that occurred outside the settlement process." Donovan looked at her. "If the investigation was deliberately compromised, if a witness was intentionally removed from the record, that's not covered by anything you signed. You need to find Gerald Pruitt," Logan said. "I need to find Gerald Pruitt," Donovan agreed, "which is what I've been trying to do for 3 weeks. And I'm telling you because if I go looking too loudly within official channels, someone may hear about it before I get there." He looked at both of them. "The Holloway family has relationships with people in this county. I don't know how deep those relationships go. I don't know which of my colleagues have had conversations I haven't been told about." He said this with the careful precision of a man who has thought through exactly what he's willing to trust and found the list shorter than he expected. "So I'm telling you privately, off the record, because you're both already in this whether you chose to be or not." A silence. Then Vivian said with a steadiness that Logan thought probably cost her something, "How do I help you find him?" He didn't sleep well that night. He lay in the dark listening to the particular quiet of a small town at 2 a.m. The dog 3 houses down that barked at 11 and then subsided, the occasional car on Birch, the house settling into itself. And he ran the facts over and over, the way he used to run mission parameters before an operation. Not to find answers, but to identify what he didn't know yet. He didn't know how far the Holloway family's influence extended into county government. He didn't know whether the missing witness was a coincidence or a deletion. He didn't know whether the people who damaged Vivian's wheelchair twice were contractors hired by Holloway's acquisition team or independent actors who just found it amusing. He didn't know whether the compliance inspections would survive legal challenge or collapse under scrutiny. He didn't know what escalation meant in the context of that card on his bay door. It was a deliberately vague word. It could mean lawyers. It could mean something else. He knew that a 24-year-old named Carter Holloway had run a red light 4 years ago at 42 miles per hour. He knew that a woman who had built something worth $40 million from a hospital room in a blue house in Pine Ridge had been sitting in the path of that car. He knew that she'd signed a settlement without knowing everything she should have known. He got up at 3:30, made tea, sat at the kitchen table with his notebook, and wrote down every name and date and fact he could organize from the past 3 weeks. Not because writing them down would help him act on them. It was too early for that. But because organizing information was the thing his brain did when it needed to not spiral. At the bottom of the page he wrote, Claire Bennett, state paper, county paper. He'd been thinking about that for 2 days. A reporter. Not someone local, necessarily. Local reporters in small counties had the same relationship problem that Donovan had described. Someone regional, state level. Someone who had no stake in who the Holloway family knew at the county planning office. He wrote it down and looked at it. Then he closed the notebook and went back to bed and lay there until 5, when he gave up and went and made real coffee and started his day. He found out about Claire Bennett through Francis Webb, which was not a path he'd expected. He called Francis on a Friday morning, 2 days after Donovan's visit, to give her an update. Francis listened without interrupting. She was excellent at listening without interrupting, which was rarer than it should have been. And when he finished, she was quiet for 5 seconds. Miles Donovan came to you off the record, she said. Yes. That means he's worried enough to work around his own department, but not yet certain enough to go official. A pause. He's got a missing witness and a timing discrepancy in a blood test, and a name that connects to your developer. That's suggestive, but it's not a case. I know. What you need, Francis said, is a record. Something that establishes the pattern publicly, with enough specificity that official channels can't ignore it. She stopped. Do you know Claire Bennett? I was going to ask you the same question. She covers regional development and land use for the Virginia State Journal. She's been working on a piece about large-scale commercial rezoning in rural counties, the kind of development that displaces existing communities. She called my office 3 months ago looking for sources. Francis paused. I didn't connect her to anyone at the time because I didn't have clients with this specific situation. Now I might. Is she trustworthy? She's a reporter. They're trustworthy about different things than regular people. Francis's voice was dry. She won't print anything she can't support, and she won't burn a source who asks for protection. I've watched her work. That's as much as I can tell you. Can you connect us? I can give you her number. The rest is your conversation. Another pause. Logan, be careful about what you give her and when. Information has a life cycle. Once you share it, you can't control where it goes. Sheriff Donovan shared something sensitive with you off the record. That information isn't yours to hand to a reporter yet. I know, he said. I won't. What you can share is the documented pattern of pressure, the compliance letters, the acquisition offers, the property damage reports. Those are your records to share. They're also exactly the kind of material she's looking for. He called Claire Bennett that afternoon from the garage, during the 20 minutes between a tire rotation and the start of an oil change, which was the kind of multitasking his days had recently become. She answered on the second ring with the specific alertness of someone who answered their phone that way because they'd learned to. He introduced himself, said Francis Webb had given him her number, said he had a situation in Pine Ridge that might be relevant to her ongoing work. Pine Ridge, she said. Pause. Is this related to Grant Holloway's development project? Logan was quiet for a beat. You know about it. I've been tracking Holloway's acquisition activity in 6 counties for 4 months. Her voice was controlled and interested. He's been buying property corridors, residential streets with development potential, and using regulatory pressure to accelerate sales from holdouts. I have documentation on 3 properties in 2 other counties. But Pine Ridge is where the project converges, and I haven't been able to get anyone there to talk to me on the record. Why not? A brief pause. Because people are afraid. Because the Holloway family has been in this region for 40 years and has relationships that make people nervous about visibility. She stopped. Are you willing to talk on the record? He thought about it. 14 years in a career where visibility got people hurt. 3 years of deliberate quiet. A garage on 5th Street and a house on Birch, and a son who was currently at school learning about the American Revolution, and who did not need his father's name in a newspaper. He thought about the blue house on Maple Street. About a woman who'd spent 4 years rebuilding her life around a settlement she'd signed without knowing everything she deserved to know. I'll talk on the record about my property, he said. The compliance letters, the acquisition pressure, the incidents at the garage, that's documented and it's mine to share. A pause. There may be more. I'll let you know when. That's enough to start, she said. Can we meet? He set up a meeting for Monday at the garage. He spent the weekend thinking about what he was willing to put on the record and what needed more time, and about the difference between those two things. He also spent part of Saturday morning at Vivian's kitchen table again, telling her about the call. She listened without interrupting, which was a thing they both did with each other by now. They'd developed, without discussing it, a conversational rhythm that gave information space to land before the response came. It was unusual in his experience. Most people started formulating their answer before you finished the sentence. She already knows about Holloway, Vivian said when he finished. 3 counties, 4 months. So we're not the beginning of this. No. He looked at her. We might be the end of it if we can give her something she can actually print. Vivian was quiet for a moment. She was looking at her coffee mug. He'd noticed she looked at objects when she was thinking through something that required her full attention, not avoiding eye contact, just redirecting attention to something that didn't require a response so the processing could happen cleanly. The accident, she said. If Donovan finds Pruitt, and Pruitt's account contradicts what the police file says, then there's a demonstrable discrepancy between the official record and an eyewitness account, Logan said. That's exactly what a reporter with 4 months of documentation on the same family needs to make a story into a case. That's my life, she said quietly. Not complaining, just naming what it was. My accident, my settlement, my wheelchair. She looked up. I have a right to know what happened to me. I know I do, but putting it in a newspaper, you don't have to, he said. Donovan's working on the official side. Francis is building the legal argument. Bennett can work with the property documentation and the regulatory pressure without touching the accident at all, if that's what you need. She looked at him. But it would be stronger with it. Yes, he said honestly. It would be considerably stronger. She nodded once. Then she picked up her coffee. Let me think about it until Monday. That's fair, he said. About it. On Sunday afternoon, Danny came with him to Vivian's house, which had not been prearranged but happened because the birthday party fallout had produced a scheduling gap, and Logan had a quick thing to check on the cameras, and Danny had inherited his father's apparent discomfort with sitting in the truck while a grown-up did something nearby. He stood in the front hallway waiting while Logan checked the camera app, and he looked around Vivian's house with the specific unhurried attention of a child who is not performing observation but is simply observing. Vivian came from the home office. Hi, Danny said. Hi yourself, she said. Your house is different. She looked at him. Different how? He considered this with genuine thought. Like, the handles are different, and the floor is really smooth. He looked down at the hardwood, which was, Logan knew now, a specific finish chosen for low friction. And the table in there is low. The desk, Vivian said. It's the height that works for me. Danny processed this. Because of the chair? Yes. He nodded, accepting this the way children accept practical explanations for physical arrangements. My dad makes our table work for me too. He lowered one side because I'm still pretty short. He said this last part with the pragmatic acknowledgement of a person who knows the fact, but doesn't particularly enjoy it. He says I'll grow into it, but I've been the same height for basically forever. You're 8, Vivian said. I know, but still. Logan looked up from the camera app. Vivian was watching Danny with an expression he hadn't seen on her before. Something open, not performed, the expression of someone who has not been around children much and is finding it different from what they expected. Not in a bad way, in the way of something unexpectedly real. "Do you want to see the office?" she said to Danny. "I have 3 monitors." Danny's expression immediately elevated to serious interest. "3? All in a row?" He looked at his father. Logan gestured. "Go ahead." Danny followed Vivian toward the office, and Logan could hear him saying with genuine reverence, "That's like a NASA thing," and her replying in a tone that he hadn't heard from her before, lighter, drier, more amused than she usually let herself sound in conversation with him. "Not quite NASA, but I'll take the comparison." Well, Logan stood in the hallway alone for a moment, listening to his son ask questions about what each monitor was for and whether she could play games on all 3 of them at once, and Vivian explaining that 2 were for work and 1 was for video calls, and that no, she mostly didn't play games, but she was open to being convinced. He looked around the hallway. The lever handles, the smooth floor, the books stacked on the low shelf that ran the length of the wall, within reach. Everything positioned with precision and thought. The home of a person who had taken complete inventory of her life and built it back deliberately, without apology and without performance. Emma would have liked her, he thought. He hadn't thought that about many people. But Monday brought Claire Bennett. She arrived at the garage at 10, punctual, which he'd expected, in a practical gray coat and with a bag that looked like it could survive a natural disaster, which was the kind of bag a regional investigative reporter carried. She was in her late 30s, with the kind of face that defaulted to attention rather than expression, and she shook his hand once, solidly, and looked around the garage with the same evaluating quality that he'd noticed in Vivian. He made coffee. They sat in the small office at the back. She had a recorder, which she put on the desk with a question in her expression. He nodded. She turned it on. They talked for 2 hours. She was good. She let him go at his own pace, asked clarifying questions without pushing, and when he laid out the documentation, the compliance letters, the photos, the card from the bay door, the police report from the wheelchair incident, the timeline of the acquisition campaign, she took notes in a small, precise handwriting that covered 3 pages without appearing to rush. At some point, she said, "There's a woman on Maple Street, Vivian Ashcroft. She's been dealing with similar pressure." "She has," Logan said. "Have you spoken with her?" "She's agreed to participate in this conversation," he said, "on her own terms. She's not here today, but she'll talk to you." Bennett looked at her notes. Ashcroft Technologies. She built that here. She did. And Holloway's been targeting her specifically. A statement, not a question. Her property is key to the development corridor. The accessible modifications she made to the house, the inspections are targeting those specifically. The structural report says her contractor's work has foundation problems. Her contractor has photographic documentation from every stage of the build that contradicts the report. Logan drank his coffee. The same contractor has done clean work in this county for 22 years. Bennett wrote something. "I'm going to need to talk to the contractor. His name is Patrick Shields. He's willing to talk." Logan had confirmed that last week. She looked at the compliance letter he'd given her a copy of. The Office of Commercial Standards was established by County Administrative Order 8 months ago. I've been looking at its authorization structure. It has broad regulatory authority that bypasses some of the normal oversight mechanisms. She said this in the careful tone of a person who has found something interesting and is presenting it neutrally. In at least one other county, a similar administrative office was established specifically in relation to a Holloway development project and dissolved after the project was completed. "So it's a mechanism," Logan said, "something he can stand up when he needs it." "That's my hypothesis," Bennett said. "I can't print hypothesis, but I can print the documented pattern if I can demonstrate it in enough locations." She looked at him. "Pine Ridge is where the pieces come together. Holloway's investment here is bigger than the other projects. He needs this corridor." Logan thought about Donovan, about Gerald Pruitt in North Carolina. He thought about what Francis had said. Information has a life cycle. "There may be something else," he said carefully. "Something that's still being investigated through official channels. I can't give you details yet, but it's related to the same family, and it would change the nature of the story significantly." Bennett looked at him steadily. "Related to the development project? Related to why Vivian Ashcroft is a target specifically?" He met her eyes. "I need you to hold space for it. I'll tell you when I can. A brief silence. She assessed him the way a reporter assesses sources, calculating reliability, motive, the gap between what someone knows and what they're choosing to share. Okay, she said. I'll hold space. She clicked her pen. But Logan, if this thing breaks officially before I can get to it. I know, he said. I'll tell you as soon as I'm able. She left at noon with copies of everything he'd given her and 3 pages of handwritten notes and the name Patrick Shields, and he stood in the garage doorway watching her car pull out onto 5th Street and thought about the shape of what was building. He called Donovan that afternoon. Anything on Pruitt? He asked. Donovan's pause was a beat too long. I found him, he said. He's in Asheville now. Different business, different life. Another pause. He didn't want to talk at first. But he talked. Donovan's voice had the quality of a man who has just come from a conversation that confirmed something he'd hoped wasn't true. He was at the gas station. He saw Carter Holloway get out of the car at the scene, before the ambulances arrived, before anyone official was there. He said the man was unsteady, and his eyes weren't right, and his breath, Gerald's word, smelled strong. Gerald's worked in outdoor labor his whole life. He knows the difference between a man who's shaken from an accident and a man who's drunk. Logan said nothing. He let it land. Gerald approached him, Donovan continued. He asked if he was all right. Holloway, Carter Holloway, asked him not to say anything. Those words, don't say anything. Gerald said he was confused because it seemed like an accident, like obviously you'd say something. But then a man in a suit arrived very quickly. Gerald said much faster than he'd expected, like someone had been called before the police were. And the man in the suit spoke to Gerald separately. Gerald said the man told him there was significant legal exposure for bystanders who made inaccurate statements about accident scenes, and that a statement from him was not necessary, and that the situation was being handled. Someone scared him off. A 23-year-old landscaper with a new business and no money for lawyers got told by a man in a suit that he could get in legal trouble for talking, Donovan said. He stayed quiet. He moved away 8 months later because he said it didn't feel right to be in the same county. A beat. He's been living with it. He wanted to talk. Once he believed I was who I said I was. He gave a full statement, notarized. Logan walked to the back of the garage. He sat down on the stool by the workbench and looked at the organized tool wall and thought about a woman who'd signed a settlement without knowing that the most important witness at the scene had been frightened into silence by a man in a suit who'd arrived before the police. Does Vivian know yet? Donovan asked. No, Logan said. She should hear it from you, directly. I know. A pause. I'm going to her tonight. I wanted you to know first because... He stopped. Then, because you're the person she's going to call after. Logan thought about that, about what it meant that a county sheriff had sized up a situation in 3 weeks and understood how the pieces of it had arranged themselves. I'll be available, Logan said. He sat in the garage after the call ended and didn't move for a long time. Outside on 5th Street, the afternoon was dimming toward early dark, the way it did in October in Virginia, the light going thin and blue by 4:30. Somewhere down the block, a door closed. A truck idled. The ordinary sounds of a town going about its business, without any knowledge of what was sitting beneath the surface of 2 specific addresses on 2 specific streets. He thought about the card on his bay door. Final notice before escalation. He thought about escalation and about what it meant now, and about whether Grant Holloway understood that the thing he'd set in motion 4 years ago had not in fact been settled, that it had been waiting in a notarized statement in Asheville, in a missing line in a police file, in a woman who'd spent 4 years being stronger than anyone required her to be, without ever knowing the full truth of why it had been necessary. He got up. He had a car to finish. He worked until 6, and then he closed the garage, and then he drove home and made dinner for Danny, and at 8:15 his phone buzzed with a text from Vivian that said, only. He came. I know. He typed back, I know you know. I'm here if you need to talk. She didn't reply that night. She didn't need to. Some things need to be held alone first before they can be shared, and he understood that without needing it explained. He sat with his cold tea in the quiet kitchen and thought about what came next, and about the shape of what had been done to her, and about the fact that November 15th was 9 days away, and about a woman in a blue house on Maple Street who had just learned that the ground she'd been standing on for 4 years was different than she'd been told. The weight of it was real. He didn't try to make it smaller than that, but beneath it, running quiet and steady like something his hands recognized from the work they knew how to do, the slow certainty that a thing could be taken apart, could be examined, could be understood completely, down to every damaged component. And then, if the right people were in the right places, rebuilt correctly. She called him at 7 in the morning, 4 days after Donovan's visit. Not a text this time. An actual call, which told him something before she said a word, because Vivian communicated primarily in texts and emails and the specific efficiency of written language. And a phone call at 7 in the morning meant something had shifted enough that written words felt insufficient. He answered on the second ring. "I want to talk to Claire Bennett," she said. No preamble, no good morning. "About the accident. About all of it. I want to go on the record." Logan was standing at the kitchen counter with his first cup of coffee, still in the specific fog of a man who'd been awake until 1 running numbers and had overridden his alarm by 20 minutes. He set the mug down. "You're sure?" he said. Not a question exactly, more the verbal equivalent of holding a door open while someone decides whether they want to walk through it. "I've been sure since Thursday night." Her voice was steady. The particular steadiness that comes after something has been processed completely, not suppressed but actually worked through. "I was waiting to make sure I wasn't sure because I was angry. Anger is a bad reason to make permanent decisions." "And now?" "Now I'm still angry," she said, "but I'm sure for the right reasons." He called Claire Bennett at 7:15. Bennett called back in 4 minutes, which suggested she'd been awake and working already. They arranged a meeting at the Blue House on Maple Street for that afternoon. Logan asked if she wanted him there. Vivian said yes without hesitating, which was the kind of answer that didn't need discussion. He closed the garage at noon, rearranged 2 afternoon appointments, and drove to Maple Street. Vivian had made coffee and put it in the good carafe, not the everyday one, which Logan noted because it was the kind of detail that said something about how seriously she was taking the next few hours. She'd also cleared the kitchen table entirely, which she never did. Usually the table had at least 2 laptops and a stack of papers and whatever Danny had left behind on his most recent visit, which currently included a small plastic dinosaur that nobody had gotten around to returning. Claire Bennett arrived at 1 o'clock. She set her bag on the floor, her recorder on the table, and looked at Vivian with the particular attention of a reporter encountering a source they've been working toward for months without knowing it. "Ms. Ashcroft," she said. Vivian said. "You can call me Vivian." They talked for 3 hours. Logan sat at the end of the table and was mostly quiet. Not because he had nothing to contribute, but because this was Vivian's account, and she didn't need him to narrate it. He answered 3 specific questions Bennett directed to him about the property documentation, and otherwise listened. Vivian talked with the careful precision of someone who has organized their thoughts fully before beginning. She described the accident in factual terms, the intersection, the time, the impact, the hospital, without dramatizing it and without minimizing it. She described the months of rehabilitation, the settlement negotiation, the version of events she'd been given about why criminal charges hadn't been pursued. She described the confidential settlement and what she'd signed and what she'd been told the evidence supported. Then she described what Donovan had told her Thursday night. Bennett's pen moved steadily. Her face stayed professionally neutral, but her eyes had the particular focus of someone encountering a story that is significantly larger than they'd anticipated. "The 4th witness," Bennett said, "Gerald Pruitt. He's given a notarized statement to Sheriff Donovan." "Yes," Vivian said. "And his account contradicts the official police record in material ways." "In the most material way possible," Vivian said, with the evenness of someone stating something that has had several days to settle into fact. He observed Carter Holloway's condition before any official documentation occurred. His observation is inconsistent with a blood alcohol level below criminal threshold. And the timing of the blood test. 2 hours and 40 minutes after the accident. I didn't know that when I accepted the settlement. I was told the evidence didn't support criminal charges. I was not told the evidence had been given 2 hours and 40 minutes to change before it was documented. Bennett put down her pen. She looked at Vivian directly. "I want to ask you something, and I want you to tell me if it's something you don't want to answer." Go ahead, Vivian said. When you agreed to the settlement, did you feel pressured? A short silence. Vivian looked at the table, then at Bennett. I was 30 years old and I was in a rehabilitation facility, and I had just been told I would not regain full function below my waist, she said. I was being offered money that would allow me to rebuild my life by lawyers who were presenting me with a version of the facts that I had no independent way to verify. She paused. I don't know if that's pressure. I know that I was not in a position to push back. I know that I trusted the process because trusting the process was the only thing available to me at the time. Another pause. I've spent a lot of the past 4 years not looking too directly at that decision. I think partly because I knew that if I looked at it carefully enough, I'd find that the decision had been made for me more than by me. The kitchen was very quiet for a moment. Then Bennett said simply, "Thank you for telling me that." Vivian nodded once. She picked up her coffee. Her hands were steady. After Bennett left, with more documentation than she'd arrived with, and a commitment that nothing would run without Vivian reviewing the relevant quotes first, Logan sat at the table across from Vivian and didn't say anything immediately. She looked tired, not broken, not even particularly sad, exactly. Just the specific tiredness of someone who has done a hard thing carefully and is now on the other side of it. That was the right thing, he said. I know, she said. That doesn't make it not exhausting. No, he agreed. It doesn't. She looked at the recorder-shaped space on the table where Bennett's recorder had been. She's going to need time to verify everything, corroborate the witness account, check the blood test documentation, cross-reference the compliance office's authorization structure. She said 2 weeks minimum, Logan said. November 15th is in 5 days. He'd been thinking about that, the card on his bay door. The deadline Holloway's people had set before they'd known what was building beneath the surface of their acquisition campaign. What does Frances say about the compliance orders? She filed a formal challenge with the county this morning. She's also requesting the complete authorization records for the Office of Commercial Standards going back to its establishment. Vivian's voice carried the specific quality of someone reciting a plan they've committed to. She says the challenge may not stop the deadline, but it creates a legal record that the orders are contested. It makes any action taken against our properties during the dispute significantly more complicated for Holloway's people. Complicated how? Legally actionable. Any buyer Holloway tries to bring in for the corridor will have to disclose the challenge. Financing becomes harder. Insurance won't underwrite on disputed properties. A pause. It doesn't stop him, but it slows him down. We need 2 weeks. We need 2 weeks, she confirmed. Logan thought about 5 days and 2 weeks and the space between them. I'm going to call Brent Sellers, he said. Vivian looked at him sharply. Holloway's acquisition man. Yes. Why? Because someone needs to let him know that the situation has changed, Logan said. Not what's changed, just that it has. That the calculation he's been running, the one where pressure plus deadline equals surrender, is based on information he no longer fully has. She was quiet for a moment. That might provoke them. They're already planning to escalate on the 15th. I'd rather they know there's a reason to reconsider before they do something we'd all have to deal with. He looked at her. I'm not going to tell him about Donovan or Pruitt. I'm going to tell him that our legal position is stronger than his client thinks, and that anything that happens to our properties before this resolves will be documented and added to an existing legal record. You're drawing a line. I'm making sure he knows there is one, he said. There's a difference. She considered this the way she considered most things, fully, without rushing it. Okay, she said. But Logan, be careful how you say it. Holloway's lawyers will parse every word. I know. He stood up. I'll run it by Frances first. Frances, when he called her from the truck outside Vivian's house, said, You want to warn them off without revealing your hand? Yes. The risk is they accelerate instead of pause. I know the risk. A long pause. Keep it short. Don't make claims. Don't use words like investigation or evidence. Those are legal triggers. Say situation. Say legal proceedings. Say formal challenges currently in process. She paused. And Logan, if Sellers asks you anything specific, anything about the accident, about Donovan, about any individual, You say nothing and end the call. Understood. He made the call the next morning, standing in the garage with the bay door closed because he wanted the acoustics of a closed room, the kind that felt less exposed. Sellers answered with the smooth professionalism of a man who handled acquisition negotiations for a living and had never once, in Logan's estimation, been surprised by anything. "Mr. Pierce," Sellers said, "I was wondering when you'd call." "I'll be brief," Logan said. "I want you to know that the properties on this block are subject to active legal proceedings challenging the regulatory actions taken against them. That process is in progress, it's documented, and anything that occurs to these properties during that process will be part of the existing legal record." A pause. "I'd encourage your client to take that into account before the 15th. Silence on the other end. Not the silence of surprise, the silence of someone recalculating. "The offer remains open," Sellers said eventually, in a tone that had shed some of its smoothness. "I'm aware," Logan said. "Mr. Pierce, my client is prepared to be very reasonable." "Your client's deadline is in 4 days," Logan said. "I'd recommend using them to discuss the legal proceedings with whoever handles that on his end." A beat. "Have a good day, Mr. Sellers." He ended the call. He stood in the closed garage for a moment with the phone in his hand, listening to the silence, running through the call the way he ran through everything, checking for errors, for moments where he'd said more than he should have or less than was necessary. He didn't think he'd made either mistake, but he also knew that Sellers would report the call to Holloway within the hour, and that Holloway would have lawyers working on it within the day, and that the window between the call and whatever they decided to do with the information was a very specific and not very large window, and that what happened inside it mattered. He opened the bay door and went back to work. The next 3 days were the strangest kind of waiting, the kind that is full of activity but centers on something you can't control yet. Francis filed additional paperwork. Donovan, working carefully within the boundaries of what he could do officially without triggering the relationships he didn't trust, forwarded Gerald Pruitt's notarized statement to the State Police Inspector General's office rather than to the county, which took the document outside the local jurisdiction entirely and made it considerably harder for anyone with county connections to make it disappear. Logan learned about that move on a Thursday evening when Donovan called him. "State IG has it," Donovan said. "They acknowledged receipt. That's all I know so far, but receipt is enough. It's in official hands above the county level now." "How long before they act on it?" "That's not a clock I can see," Donovan said. "Could be weeks. Could be faster if the right person picks it up and sees what it is." A pause. "What I can tell you is that Carter Holloway's name isn't low profile in this state. The Holloway family does enough business across enough counties that a state investigator looking at this file will understand its implications pretty quickly. And Grant Holloway, does he know his brother's name is in a notarized witness statement?" A short silence. "I'd be surprised if he doesn't have people watching for exactly that kind of thing." Donovan's voice was careful. "Which is why I'm telling you to be very aware of your surroundings in the next few days. Both you and Vivian." Logan didn't need to be told twice. He'd already adjusted his routines, coming and going from the garage at varying times rather than the predictable schedule he'd maintained for 3 years, making sure Danny was with him or with a known adult at all times, checking the house cameras every morning. He hadn't told Danny anything was wrong. Danny, who was perceptive in the specific way of children whose single parent has a slightly too controlled affect, had asked him twice if everything was okay. Logan had said yes, mostly, which was the most honest version of the answer available. He told Vivian about the state IG referral that evening. She was in the garage again. The late afternoon visits had become habitual enough that he'd bought a proper office chair for the space, replacing the folding one, which Vivian had looked at without comment when it appeared and said only, "That's better." She heard about the referral and was quiet for a moment. "So it's real now," she said. "Officially, at a level above the county." "It's real." She looked at her laptop screen without seeing it. "I keep thinking about that man in the suit," she said. "The one Gerald Pruitt described. The one who showed up before the police." Logan waited. "Someone had to call him," she said. "Someone at the scene in the first minutes before anyone took stock of anything. Someone called a family lawyer before they called anyone else." A pause. And the lawyer arrived in time to speak to the only witness who was standing close enough to know. And that witness was 23 years old and had a new business and no money and went quiet. She looked at Logan. That's what actually happened to me. Not the car, not the driver. The decision that someone made in the first 15 minutes, to manage it rather than account for it. He didn't say anything. There wasn't anything to say to that. It was true, and she knew it was true, and she'd arrived at it herself. And sometimes the only honest response to a true thing is to acknowledge it without decoration. I'm not falling apart, she said, with the preemptive self-awareness that was one of her specific qualities. I want to be clear about that. I'm angry, but I'm functioning. I know, he said. I'm saying it because... She paused. Because I think sometimes people expect that finding out something like this would break the person. Like the grief should come flooding back, and maybe it will eventually, but right now what I feel is clear. Like something that was blurry has come into focus, and the focus is uncomfortable, but I can see it properly now. She looked at him. Does that make sense? More than most things make sense, he said. She made a sound that was approximately a laugh. That's a strange compliment. It was meant as one. She went back to her laptop. He went back to the car he was working on. After a few minutes, she said, without looking up, November 15th is tomorrow. I know, he said. What do you think they'll do? He thought about Sellers and about the brief recalculation he'd heard in the man's silence. I think they'll let it pass. The deadline was a pressure tool. It was designed to produce a decision before anyone lawyered up properly. Francis's challenge has already complicated their position. And if Holloway's lawyers have figured out that something is moving at the state level, they may not know yet, Vivian said. No, but they may suspect. He straightened up from the car. People who manage situations for a living develop a sense for when a situation has stopped being manageable the way they planned. She was quiet for a moment. And if they do something anyway? If they escalate? Then everything they do becomes documentation, Logan said. And documentation is exactly what we need. November 15th came and went without incident, which was itself a kind of answer. Claire Bennett called on a Tuesday morning, 9 days after their meeting at Vivian's house. I need 2 more days, she said. I have everything I need for the property story. The regulatory pattern, the acquisition campaign, the compliance office structure. I can run that piece now. A pause. But if I have 2 more days, I can include the accident. I've independently corroborated Gerald Pruitt's account through a second source, another person who was at the scene, not listed in the original file. Logan went very still. You found someone else. An EMT who responded to the accident. He's been retired for 2 years and he's in his 60s, and he said, and I am quoting him directly because I want you to understand how clear this is, that man was drunk. I've seen plenty of accidents and plenty of shock, and that man was drunk. He didn't come forward at the time because he was told by his supervisor that the investigation was being handled, and his statement wasn't needed. A pause. His supervisor at the time had a pension that was tied to county government. He retired 6 months after the accident. Logan sat down on the stool by the workbench. 2 sources independent of each other, he said, saying the same thing. Bennett's voice carried the specific controlled energy of a reporter who has assembled something they know is significant. I want to run the full piece, both stories together, the development campaign and the original accident, because they're not separate stories. They're the same story. Grant Holloway has been protecting his family from the consequences of that accident for 4 years, and now that protection is the reason he needs Vivian Ashcroft's house. Run it, Logan said. I need to confirm that with Vivian. Call her, but I think you'll hear the same answer. He was right. Vivian called him 12 minutes after Bennett's call ended, and she said the same word he had. Run it. 2 days, Logan said. 2 days, she confirmed. The 2 days had a particular quality, the compressed, overbright quality of time that you know is the last stretch before something changes permanently. Logan went through his routines, the garage, the school pickup, the dinners that were serviceable but not impressive, the homework arguments, the bedtime negotiations. He called Francis every morning. He texted Donovan every evening. He checked the camera feeds before he went to sleep. Danny, on the second evening, sat across from him at dinner and said, Dad, what's happening? Logan looked at his son, 8 years old, gap-toothed, watching him with the specific attentiveness of a child who has learned that the adults in his life communicate as much by what they don't say as what they do. Something complicated, Logan said. With the neighborhood. It's being worked out. Is it bad? It's getting better. He thought about how to be honest at the right level. You know how sometimes something is broken and it looks really broken and you're not sure it's fixable, and then you look at it closely enough and find the actual problem, and it turns out fixing it is possible if you do it right. Danny considered this with the seriousness it deserved. Like the dishwasher. Like the dishwasher. Okay. Danny ate his pasta. Is Vivian involved? Logan looked at him. Why do you ask that? Because you talk about her, Danny said, with the matter-of-fact quality of a child reporting an observation. Not a lot, but when something happens, you say Vivian and I need to check with Vivian and stuff. He shrugged with one shoulder, the gesture of an 8-year-old communicating that he is not making a big deal out of this, but wanted to note it. She's nice. I like her monitors. She is nice, Logan said. And yes, she's involved. Danny nodded once, accepting this the same way he'd accepted the explanation about the wheelchair at the beginning, practically, without drama. Is she okay? She's handling it very well, Logan said. Good. Another forkful of pasta. Can we go see her again sometime? Yeah, Logan said. I think so. He went to bed that night and lay in the dark, thinking about the piece that was about to run, and about a planning commission meeting that Francis had alerted him to, a county rezoning hearing scheduled for the following Thursday, where Holloway's development project was on the agenda for preliminary approval. Bennett's article would be published in the Virginia State Journal on Wednesday morning, one day before the hearing. The timing was not a coincidence. Bennett had noted the hearing date and structured her publication timeline around it deliberately. She hadn't said so explicitly, but she didn't need to. Logan lay in the dark and thought about how things moved, about the specific way that information, when it reached the right people at the right moment, could shift the weight of a thing that had seemed immovable. He'd seen it in other contexts, different contexts, where the factor that changed everything wasn't force, but precision. Not the loudest action, but the correctly placed one. He thought about Vivian in front of a planning commission. He didn't know yet if that was part of the plan. He thought it probably should be. He called her at 6:30 the next morning, the morning before the article ran, because he wanted to ask about the hearing before the day became too full for a real conversation. She answered quickly. He could hear that she was already at her desk. The rezoning hearing, he said. Thursday. Francis mentioned it. I know about it, she said. Are you going? A pause. I've been thinking about it. I think you should, he said. Not pushing, just laying it out. Bennett's piece runs tomorrow. The hearing is the next day. If there are commissioners who needed a reason to reconsider their position on this project, they're going to have one in the morning paper. And having me present at the hearing. Having you present at the hearing means they can't treat it as an abstract development proposal. It means the person most directly affected by what this family did is in the room. He paused. You don't have to say anything, but being there, I'm not going to just sit there, she said quietly. I know you're not. A longer pause. He waited. Will you come? She said. Yes, he said, without any calculation, just yes. Okay, she said, then I'm going. He opened the garage an hour later and found Patrick Shields, the contractor, waiting outside. Not because they'd arranged it, but because Shields had apparently seen the writing on the wall regarding the article and wanted to make sure his documentation was in order. He was a heavy-set man in his late 50s with the weathered hands of someone who'd spent decades building things outdoors, and he laid a folder on Logan's counter with the quiet authority of someone who's done right by their work and knows it. I heard the article's running tomorrow, Shields said. Where'd you hear that? Claire Bennett called me last week to verify the technical specifications of the foundation work. She's thorough. He tapped the folder. This has everything. Foundation photographs, pour records, inspection sign-offs, engineer stamp, everything in sequence. He looked at Logan with the direct expression of a man who has been unfairly accused of something and has organized his response with care. I've never done sloppy work. 22 years. I'm not starting by having it said that Vivian Ashcroft's house is falling apart because of something I built. Nobody who matters thinks that, Logan said. I want to make sure the paper has it anyway. He pushed the folder toward Logan. Can you get that to the reporter? I'll pass it on today. Shields nodded. Then turning to go, he stopped. How's she doing? Vivian. Holding up, Logan said. Better than most people would. Shields made a sound that was something between acknowledgement and admiration. She paid cash up front for that project, he said. First time a client had ever done that with me. She said she'd read the contract thoroughly and found it fair, and didn't see any reason to negotiate terms that were already reasonable. He shook his head slightly. I thought, there's a person who knows how to do business. A beat. She doesn't deserve this. No, Logan said. She doesn't. He forwarded the folder contents to Bennett by noon, and Bennett responded within 20 minutes with 2 words. Perfect. Thank you. Awesome. The article ran at 6:15 Wednesday morning. Logan was awake already. He'd set an alarm for 6, which was earlier than he needed to be up, because he'd known he wasn't going to be able to sleep past it anyway. He made coffee, sat at the kitchen table, and opened the Virginia State Journal website on his laptop. The headline was, A Pattern of Pressure, How One Developer Used Regulatory Power to Clear the Way for a $40 million Project, and what a 4-year-old police file reveals about why. It ran long. He read every word. Bennett had done it right. The property story was built from documentation, the compliance office's authorization structure, the corroborated pattern of acquisition pressure across multiple counties, the timeline of offers and regulatory actions, the testimony of Patrick Shields, the records of the police reports about Vivian's wheelchair. Then, in the second half, the accident, Gerald Pruitt's account, the retired EMT's account, the blood test timing, the missing witness line, the arrival of a lawyer before the police, the settlement signed by a 30-year-old woman in a rehabilitation facility. Vivian's name was in it. Her quotes were measured and precise and said everything they needed to say without excess. The piece quoted Francis Webb on the legal challenges. It quoted Donovan, carefully, as a law enforcement official familiar with the investigation, on the discrepancy in the police file. It quoted the EMT by name with his permission. It did not quote Logan by name on the accident material, only on the property documentation, which he'd agreed to. He'd been careful about the line between those two things, and Bennett had respected it. He sat at the table and read it through twice, and then he put his coffee down and just sat for a minute. Upstairs, he could hear Danny moving, the particular thudding footsteps of a child who does not negotiate with the floor. In about 8 minutes, Danny would come downstairs and need breakfast, and have opinions about what kind of cereal was available, and life would continue in its ordinary shape, which was exactly right. His phone buzzed. Vivian. He answered. I've read it, she said. Me too. A pause on the line. He tried to read the texture of the silence and couldn't exactly. It was complicated, several things occupying the same space. It's real now, she said. People are going to read it and know. Miss, yes. I thought I'd feel, I don't know, more relieved or more scared. Another pause. I feel like I've been holding a door closed for 4 years and I've finally let go of it and I don't know what's on the other side. That's honest, he said. I'm good at being honest, she said. I'm less good at not knowing what comes next. Nobody's good at that, he said. Anyone who tells you different is either lying or hasn't been in a situation that mattered enough. A short exhale. We have to be at the county building at 9 tomorrow. I'll pick you up at 8:30, he said. She was quiet for a moment. Logan? Yeah. Thank you. She said it simply, no performance around it. Not for any one specific thing, just for all of it, from the diner to this morning. He didn't say you're welcome because that felt insufficient and slightly dishonest in the way of phrases that stand in for something more accurate. He said, I'll see you at 8:30. He could hear the near smile in her voice. 8:30, she confirmed. He put the phone down and drank his coffee, which had gone cold. Upstairs, Danny's footsteps reached the top of the stairs and started down, and Logan closed the laptop and stood up and started making eggs, And through the kitchen window, the morning was coming in gray and cool, the particular gray of a Virginia October morning that might clear into something or might not. And he thought about the hearing tomorrow and about what Vivian would say in a room full of people with the authority to make or not make a decision. And he thought she would say exactly the right thing, because she always did. And he thought that sometimes the right thing, said clearly, in the right room, at the right moment, was enough. Sometimes it actually was enough. Danny came through the kitchen doorway in mismatched socks and announced that he was hungry, and Logan said, "I know, sit down," and the morning continued. The county building on Thursday was not a large room. It seated perhaps 100 people. Folding chairs arranged in rows before a raised dais where the 7 planning commissioners sat, and a podium at the front where members of the public were permitted to address the commission during the designated comment period. The room was full. Logan had not expected it to be full. He'd underestimated what a state newspaper article could do overnight in a small county. People he recognized from around Pine Ridge were in those chairs. Carol Reyes from the farmer's market, Patsy from Ruth Ann's, Dale Pruitt, the accountant, Patrick Shields near the back with his folder on his lap. People he didn't recognize, who'd read the article and driven from other towns. A cluster of what appeared to be attorneys. A pair of state officials whose badges Logan couldn't read from the side of the room. And reporters. At least 4, including a television crew from the regional station that he hadn't anticipated. He and Vivian had arrived at 8:55. He'd pushed the door open for her, which she didn't need but also didn't object to on this particular morning, and they'd found seats near the center aisle. Danny was at school. Francis Webb was in the second row, having driven from Roanoke the previous evening. Donovan was standing against the back wall in uniform. He caught Logan's eye across the room and gave one small nod. Grant Holloway was in the front row on the right side, which Logan noticed immediately. He was a large man, late 50s, with the specific look of wealth that's been maintained long enough to stop being effortful. Good suit, correct posture, the absolute stillness of a person who is accustomed to rooms waiting for him. He had 2 attorneys beside him and Brent Sellers on his other side. He did not look at Vivian when she came in, which meant he knew exactly where she was. The hearing opened at 9. The commission chair, a woman named Eleanor Park, who Logan had looked up and determined had been on the commission for 11 years, and had a reputation for procedural exactness, called the session to order and moved through the preliminary business with the efficiency of someone who runs a tight meeting. Then she said, "The first substantive matter on the agenda is the proposed rezoning application for the Maple 5th Street corridor, submitted by Holloway Development Group. Before we proceed to the applicant's presentation, the chair will note that this commission has received considerable correspondence overnight in response to reporting in the Virginia State Journal this morning. The commission is aware of the reporting. We will address questions of process and legal challenges before taking any action on the rezoning application." She looked directly at Holloway's table. "Counsel for the applicant." One of the attorneys stood up. He was composed, which Logan expected. Holloway didn't hire lawyers who weren't. He made a brief statement acknowledging the article's existence and characterizing its contents as unverified allegations that the applicant disputed and that had no bearing on the validity of the rezoning application before the commission. Then he sat down. Eleanor Park looked at the room. "Is there public comment?" The comment period ran for 40 minutes. Patrick Shields spoke about the fraudulent structural report on Vivian's property. Dale Pruitt spoke about the pattern of compliance orders affecting multiple businesses on the block. The EMT from the article, who Logan had not known was coming, but whose presence in the room produced a specific quality of attention when the commission chair confirmed his identity before he spoke, gave a brief direct account of what he had observed at the intersection of Route 11 and Crawford Avenue 4 years ago, which was 4 sentences and landed in the room like a stone in water. And then Vivian rolled to the podium. The room went quieter than it had been for any of the previous speakers. The television camera moved. She adjusted the microphone, which was set too high, and did it without apology or performance. Then she looked at the commission. "My name is Vivian Ashcroft," she said. "I've lived on Maple Street in Pine Ridge for 4 years. I run a technology company from my home that employs 31 people, and that I built in this town because I needed to rebuild my life somewhere, and I chose here, and I have not regretted it." She paused. "I'm not going to speak about the accident today in detail. You've read the article. You know what I know now. I'm not going to perform my grief about that in this room because that's not what this hearing is for, and it's not what I'm here to do. A small pause. What I'm here to do is say the following. For the past 4 months, I have received fraudulent inspection orders targeting home modifications that allow me to live independently. I have received escalating acquisition pressure tied directly to those orders. My mobility equipment has been deliberately damaged twice, once in public, once in my own yard, at night. She looked at the commission steadily. This is not a development proposal. This is a campaign, and it has been conducted with the specific understanding that the people being targeted would be too exhausted, too legally outmatched, or too afraid to say so clearly in a room like this one. She looked at the commissioners, all 7 of them. I am not too exhausted, she said. I am not outmatched, and I am not afraid. A beat. I am asking this commission to look at what is actually in front of it, not a development proposal, a pattern. A family that managed a serious situation 4 years ago through connections and pressure and is now using the same tools to acquire the property of the person that situation affected most. She was quiet for a moment. I am asking you to see that clearly and to make a decision that reflects what you see. She turned and came back to her seat. The room was quiet for 3 full seconds. Then someone in the back started clapping, and it moved forward through the rows. And by the time it reached the front, it was most of the room, which was not something that typically happened at County Planning Commission hearings in Pine Ridge, Virginia, or probably anywhere else. Logan looked at her. She was looking straight ahead, not at the clapping, not at Holloway, not at anyone in particular, just ahead. Her hands were in her lap, and they were not entirely steady, and she didn't try to make them steady, and he thought that was exactly right. He didn't clap. He just sat beside her. That was what he was there for. Eleanor Park called a recess at 10:45. It was not on the agenda. The commission chair simply looked at the room, at the cameras, at the 2 state officials whose badges Logan had since been able to read as belonging to the Virginia Attorney General's office, at the 7 commissioners who had been exchanging glances with increasing frequency since Vivian left the podium, and said that the commission would take a 30-minute recess before proceeding to deliberations. Logan had been in enough rooms where decisions were made to recognize the shape of what was happening. The recess wasn't procedural. It was a room full of people who needed to confer privately before committing to anything publicly, which meant the public thing had become complicated enough that the private thing needed sorting first. He and Vivian went to the hallway. Frances found them near the water fountain with the particular expression of a lawyer who is managing her satisfaction very carefully. The AG's office didn't come here to watch, Frances said quietly. They came because somebody sent them here, which means someone at the state level read that article this morning and made some calls before 9 o'clock. Donovan? Logan asked. I'd guess Donovan plus the IG referral plus the article all arriving in the same 24 hours created a specific kind of urgency. Frances looked at Vivian. How are you holding up? Fine, Vivian said. Then, more honestly, tired, but fine. Frances nodded. She understood the distinction. The commission is going to vote down the rezoning. I don't know yet what they'll say about the compliance orders, but the rezoning is finished. You can see it in how Park handled the recess. She's giving Holloway's attorneys time to decide whether to withdraw the application voluntarily before they get publicly voted down, which is the kind of consideration you extend when you want the outcome but not the spectacle. Will they withdraw? Logan asked. If they're smart. Frances glanced back toward the hearing room door. Being voted down becomes part of the public record. Withdrawing is cleaner for their other interests. A pause. Though at this point, I'm not sure how many other interests are going to survive the week intact. She went back inside to watch the commissioners. Logan and Vivian stayed in the hallway. The hallway was institutional. Linoleum floor, fluorescent lights, a bulletin board with county announcements nobody read. Not the kind of space that suited the weight of what had just occurred in the room it adjoined, but then most important moments happened in ordinary places. Logan had learned that a long time ago. You didn't shake, he said. Vivian looked at him. What? At the podium. You said what you wanted to say, and you didn't try to make it into something it wasn't. He looked at the bulletin board without seeing it. A lot of people would have made it into a performance, something designed to produce a reaction. I don't need their reaction, she said. I needed them to hear it accurately. A small pause. The performance is for when you're not sure the truth is enough on its own, when you have to dress it up to make it land. She looked at him. I was pretty sure the truth was enough. It was, he said. She was quiet for a moment. I keep thinking about what I said, about not being afraid. I wasn't lying, but I want to be clear with you, specifically, that I was absolutely terrified before I went up there. I know, he said. You knew? Your hands, he said, when you came back to the seat. She looked at her hands, resting in her lap now, steady enough. I didn't think you noticed. I notice most things, he said. I just don't always say so. She made the sound that was becoming familiar to him. That particular near laugh that she produced when something landed unexpectedly. That is either reassuring or unsettling. I haven't decided which. Take your time, he said. Bong. Holloway's attorneys withdrew the rezoning application at 11:20, which was 5 minutes before the commission reconvened, which meant they'd made the decision during the recess and had spent the remaining time on the paperwork. Brent Sellers walked out of the building with his phone to his ear and didn't look at anyone. Holloway himself left without speaking, which Logan watched from across the room with the specific attention of a man who understands the difference between a man who has accepted a defeat and a man who is repositioning for the next move. Holloway was repositioning. Logan was reasonably certain of that. But repositioning took time, and time was no longer on Holloway's side in the way it had been 3 weeks ago. Eleanor Park reconvened the meeting, noted the withdrawal of the application, and then, with the careful precision of someone who has decided to use the moment for more than its minimum, stated for the public record that the Commission was opening a formal inquiry into the authorization and conduct of the Office of Commercial Standards, and that all compliance orders currently issued by that office against properties in the Maple Fifth Street corridor were suspended pending the outcome of that inquiry. Suspended. Not dismissed, not vacated, but suspended, which meant Logan's garage operated without interference, and Vivian's fraudulent structural orders carried no enforcement weight, and the legal lever that had been pressing on them for 4 months was, for now, not pressing. Frances, in the second row, wrote something in her notebook. The hearing ended at 11:53. The afternoon unraveled in pieces. By 2 o'clock, Claire Bennett had filed a follow-up to the morning's article noting the withdrawal of the rezoning application and the Commission's suspension of the compliance orders. By 3, the state AG's office had confirmed to Bennett that it was reviewing the evidence in the Pruitt matter and coordinating with the Inspector General's investigation. By 4, Logan had received a call from a reporter at a news outlet he'd never heard of asking for comment, which he declined, and a call from Francis telling him that Holloway's primary financing partner for the Pine Ridge project, a regional real estate investment firm, had issued a statement saying it was reassessing its involvement in light of recent developments. That's the money walking, Francis said. When the money walks, the project is finished. Whatever Holloway wants to do next, he's not doing it on that corridor. And the investigation? Logan asked. The IG and the AG are moving on parallel tracks. One is about the conduct of the investigation 4 years ago. The witness, the blood test timing, the suppression of evidence. The other is about the abuse of regulatory authority in connection with the acquisition campaign. A pause. These are serious matters. They take time. Nobody is going to prison next week. But they're real. They're very real, Francis said. And importantly, they're now in the hands of people who have no relationship with the Holloway family's influence in this county. She paused. The civil case is also going to reopen. Vivian's attorneys are going to renegotiate on entirely different terms with the new evidence on the table. That's a slower process, but it's a process that leads somewhere. He relayed most of this to Vivian that evening in her kitchen, which was where they both seemed to end up when the day had accumulated enough that it needed sorting. She listened with the quality of attention she brought to everything, full, unhurried, letting the information arrive without preemptive reaction. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. It's not over, she said. No, he said. Not legally, not officially. It's the beginning of the over, not the over itself. She nodded. I know, I've been telling myself that all afternoon because I think there's a version of me that wants it to be done and wants to feel the way you're supposed to feel when something is done. And the accurate version is that it isn't done and I shouldn't pretend it is. She looked at her coffee. But the compliance orders are suspended. The rezoning is gone. The investigation is real. And people know. She looked up. People know what happened to me and what they tried to do about it. A pause. That part feels significant. It is significant, Logan said, maybe the most significant part. She looked at him. Why? He thought about how to say it accurately. Because the campaign they ran against you, against both of us, was designed to operate in the dark. The intimidation only works if nobody is looking. The regulatory pressure only works if it looks legitimate. The whole architecture of what they were doing depended on you being isolated and the connection staying invisible. He paused. They spent 4 years keeping the accident invisible. The moment it wasn't, the rest of it started falling apart. She was quiet with that. I lost 4 years, she said eventually. Not bitterly, just naming it. I lost 4 years thinking I knew the full story of what happened to me. I built everything around a version of events that was missing its most important part. You built it anyway, he said. That's not nothing. No, she said. It's not nothing. She looked at him with the direct quality she had, the full attention look he'd come to understand as her natural mode with things she took seriously. I keep thinking about the woman I was in that rehabilitation facility, who signed those papers, who was so tired of fighting the physical part that she just let someone else decide what the story was. A pause. I want to tell her something. I don't know what exactly. Something like, you were doing the best you could with what you had, and it wasn't your fault that what you had wasn't the whole truth. Logan said nothing. Sometimes nothing was the correct response. I think that's the part I'm still working out, she said. Not the legal part, not the Holloway part. Just the part where I stopped being angry at myself for not knowing what I wasn't told. He looked at her. She looked back. The kitchen was quiet around them, the good quiet of a room where two people have stopped performing and are just present with each other. Emma, he said, spent a lot of time telling me that the things I blamed myself for not knowing were mostly things nobody had told me, and that treating an information gap as a moral failure was the kind of thinking that made smart people into very effective punishing machines for themselves. He paused. I'm not great at taking that advice, but I've gotten better at recognizing when someone else needs to hear it. Vivian looked at him for a long moment. She sounds like someone who had to repeat herself a lot. Constantly, he said. She was very patient about it. She almost smiled. Not the near smile this time, but something closer to the actual thing. She'd have had her work cut out with me too. Yeah, he said. I think you two would have driven each other crazy and liked each other enormously. She laughed then. A real one, short and genuine, surprised out of her. And he thought that was probably the best sound he'd heard in a month that had contained a considerable amount of difficult sounds. November moved through its middle weeks with the particular quality of a chapter that is resolving rather than building. The things that needed to happen were happening, slowly, through the proper channels, in the way that actual justice tends to work. Not dramatically, not all at once, but incrementally and documentably, each development building on the last. The county's formal inquiry into the Office of Commercial Standards produced, within 10 days, a finding that the office had been authorized through a county administrative process that bypassed normal oversight and that 4 of its 7 compliance officers had been hired without competitive selection or standard background review. The finding was dry and bureaucratic and was reported in a 4-paragraph item in the local paper. But Francis said it was exactly the kind of procedural documentation that would underpin everything else going forward. The state IG's investigation into the original accident produced, 3 weeks after the hearing, a formal referral to the state attorney general recommending that the matter be reviewed for potential obstruction of the original investigation. This was reported in the Virginia State Journal in a follow-up article by Claire Bennett that ran on the front page below the fold, not as prominent as the original piece, but present and real and part of the record. Carter Holloway retained separate legal counsel, which meant, Francis noted dryly, that the Holloway family was no longer presenting a unified front, which tended to happen when criminal exposure became specific enough that individual liability diverged from collective interest. Grant Holloway's development company lost 2 more financing partners and 1 anchor commercial tenant who had been in negotiation for a property in a different county. He did not speak publicly. He did not reach out to Logan or Vivian directly. He was present in the situation the way a large thing is present when it's been cornered, very still and aware of being watched. Logan did not find this comforting exactly. He'd known enough cornered things in his life to understand that stillness was not the same as stopped. But he also understood that the perimeter had shifted, that the territory of what Holloway could do without consequence had contracted significantly, and that the people watching him now were not the county officials whose relationships he'd cultivated over 4 decades, but state investigators who had no particular stake in his comfort. He went back to work. The transmission job he'd pushed back during the worst of October got finished. A new client came in on a referral from the Hendersons, a woman named Delia Park, who needed her exhaust system replaced, and who turned out to be a first-grade teacher who knew Danny from the school where she worked, which was the kind of circular smallness of a town that Logan had come to find genuinely pleasant rather than claustrophobic. He fixed the exhaust system and gave her a fair price, and she left a handwritten thank you note in the mailbox the next day, which he found Wednesday morning and read twice and then put in the drawer with the compliance letters, not because it belonged there, but because it was the right size to fit. Danny, released from the partial information blackout of the previous month, was told a simplified but accurate version of what had happened, that some powerful people had tried to make Logan and Vivian leave their homes, and that it hadn't worked, and that the people responsible were now being investigated. He listened to this with the focused attention of a child being given information they've known was being withheld, processed it, and said, "So Vivian gets to stay." "She gets to stay," Logan confirmed. "Good." Danny ate his cereal. "She said she'd teach me how to use the 3rd monitor." Logan looked at his son. "When did she say that?" "When we were there the 2nd time, the time you were on the phone with the lawyer." He hadn't known that. "What do you need a 3rd monitor for?" "I don't know yet," Danny said reasonably, "but it's good to know how, Choto." It was Vivian who brought up the dinner. This surprised him slightly. She was not, in his experience, a person who initiated social arrangements that didn't have a practical purpose attached to them. She was warm, genuinely so, but in the specific way of people who have learned to be deliberate about where they put their warmth, having discovered that it is not an infinite resource. She brought it up on a Friday afternoon in the garage, late November, the weather having made its final transition into something that required a coat and meant the bay doors stayed half closed for warmth. She was at the office chair he'd bought, laptop open as always, but she wasn't looking at the laptop. She was looking at the space in front of her in the way of someone who's been sitting with a thought long enough to have made a decision about it. "Danny's been asking about the monitors," she said. "He mentioned," Logan said from under a car. "I thought maybe Sunday, if you don't have plans." A pause. "I'll cook. You've been feeding me coffee for 2 months, and I've never once reciprocated with an actual meal." He came out from under the car, looked at her. She looked back with the directness she always had, but there was something slightly different in it, a quality he hadn't seen before. Not vulnerability exactly, more like someone who has decided to stop being quite so careful about something. "That'd be good," he said. "Good," she said, and went back to her laptop. Sunday came gray and cold, the kind of late November day that couldn't decide whether it wanted to rain. Logan brought a bottle of wine because Francis had once told him, "You always bring something when someone cooks for you," and Danny brought the plastic dinosaur that had been living on Vivian's kitchen table for a month, and that he'd decided was a gift rather than a forgotten object. Vivian had cooked a proper meal. Not elaborate, but real. Roasted chicken, root vegetables, bread she'd made herself that morning, which Logan hadn't known she could do and which Danny identified immediately as significantly better than his father's bread, which was not a high bar but was still a fair assessment. They ate at the kitchen table, the 3 of them, with the meal spread between the laptops that had been moved to the counter and the stack of books that lived on the end of the table and never quite got put away. Danny talked about school, about the dinosaur project his class was doing, about a disagreement he'd had with a friend named Marcus that he was fairly certain he'd been right about, but was willing to consider alternative interpretations of. Vivian listened to him with the full attention she brought to everything, and asked questions that were specific rather than generic, not what kind of dinosaurs, but which one does Marcus like and why. And Danny responded to being taken seriously the way children do, which is by becoming slightly more articulate and considerably more willing to revise his certainty about Marcus. Logan ate and watched the two of them and felt something that was difficult to name precisely. Not happiness exactly. Happiness was too simple a word for something that had this much texture. Something more like the satisfaction of a thing finding its correct alignment. The specific feeling of components that have been mismatched, finally sitting right. He thought about Emma. He thought about her the way he'd learned to think about her over 3 years. Not as absence, not as wound, but as the specific presence she still had in who he'd decided to be. She had made him into the person who'd walked across that diner. She had made him into the person who'd come back the next day to fix the chair properly, and the person who'd answered the unknown call, and the person who'd sat in Vivian's kitchen at 2 in the morning and driven to the hardware store for camera supplies and called Francis Webb and stood beside a podium at a county planning commission hearing without needing to be the one holding the microphone. He wondered sometimes if she'd have been surprised by how it turned out. He thought probably not. She'd had a very accurate sense of where things tended to go when he actually paid attention. After dinner, Danny went with Vivian to the office to receive the promised education on 3 monitor setups, and Logan sat at the kitchen table alone for a few minutes with his second glass of wine and listened to the muffled sound of his son asking earnest questions and Vivian answering them with the dry humor she deployed when she was comfortable, and the rain that had finally made its decision starting against the kitchen window. He thought about what Vivian had said at the hearing, about powerful people expecting ordinary citizens to surrender through fear, about refusing to be one of them anymore. He turned the glass in his hands and thought about how the word ordinary had been doing a specific kind of work in that sentence. Not ordinary meaning unremarkable. Ordinary meaning the kind of person whose losses aren't covered, whose fights aren't witnessed, whose suffering is managed rather than addressed, and who is expected, politely but clearly, to absorb whatever they're given and make room for the needs of more important people. He thought about all the versions of that kind of ordinary he'd seen in 14 years in the military. The places where the ordinary people were the ones who actually lived in the places that other people's decisions affected, and how often those decisions were made without the ordinary people in the room. He thought about why he'd eventually left, and about the conversation with Emma near the end where she'd said, "You've spent your whole career protecting things from the outside. At some point you have to be inside something you care about." He was inside something now. 2 streets of a small Virginia town, a garage, a school, a diner, a blue house on Maple Street with lever handles and 3 monitors and root vegetables and better bread than he'd ever manage. He was inside it completely. It was enough. It was actually, genuinely enough. December came without drama, which felt like its own kind of gift. The formal findings of the county inquiry were released on a Monday, confirming what the preliminary report had indicated. The Office of Commercial Standards had been established and operated outside standard oversight protocols, and its compliance orders against properties in the Maple 5th Street corridor lacked proper legal foundation. All orders were formally vacated. Logan received a letter, official this time, with a real return address and an actual seal, stating that his garage's compliance record was clear and that no further action would be taken. He put it in the drawer with the other letter. They made an interesting pair. Vivian's civil attorneys filed a motion to reopen her settlement based on newly discovered evidence, which was the beginning of a legal process that Francis told her would likely take a year, possibly more, and which would require her to revisit things she'd spent 4 years trying to put behind her. She told Logan about it on a Tuesday afternoon in the garage, and she said it with the specific matter-of-factness of someone who has looked at a hard road and decided that the destination justifies it. "It'll be uncomfortable," she said. "Probably," he said. "I'll have to talk about the accident in detail, in depositions, probably in court." "Yeah." She was quiet for a moment. "I'm okay with that. I wasn't okay with it 6 weeks ago. Now I am." She looked at him. "I think the difference is that I know the full story now. Talking about something you understand completely is different from talking about something that has a missing piece you can't account for." He thought about that. About the specific discomfort of incomplete stories, about the way his own story had a period of about 4 years where the missing piece was Emma, and how long it had taken him to understand that the missing piece didn't mean the story was wrong. Francis also says the restitution figure, if it goes to trial with the full evidence, will be considerably different from the original settlement, Vivian said. How considerably? She named a number. Logan looked at her. She met his look with the expression of someone who has had several days to get used to a number and has arrived at a practical relationship with it. That's significant, he said. It is, she said. I don't know what to do with it yet. I've been running a company for 3 years without thinking about what I'd do if I had substantially more. A pause. I keep thinking about Patrick Shields and Francis and the fact that Miles Donovan took a personal risk to tell me the truth when he didn't have to. She looked at her hands. I want to do something with it that means something, not just accumulate. You'll figure it out, he said. I will, she said. I'm good at figuring things out when I know what I'm working with. Carter Holloway was formally charged in the first week of December with obstruction of a law enforcement investigation for his role in the events immediately following the accident. The charge was narrow. It couldn't be otherwise, given what the evidence supported versus what it suggested. But it was real, and it carried consequences, and it had his name on it in a document that would be part of the public record for the rest of his life. Grant Holloway was not charged directly. Not yet. Francis was careful to say not yet, because the investigation into the abuse of regulatory authority was still active, and the relationship between Grant Holloway and the former county official who had authorized the Office of Commercial Standards was something the State Attorney General's office was examining with the particular attentiveness that offices bring to things that have significant implications. This was not the clean and complete accounting that Logan, privately, would have preferred. He knew that. He'd been in enough situations to know that complete accountability was rarer than partial accountability, and that partial accountability was better than none, and that the best you could usually do was make sure the documentation existed so that the next chapter, whenever it came, had somewhere to build from. He said something close to this to Vivian one evening, and she said, "You're describing patience." "I guess I am." "I'm not naturally patient," she said. "Neither am I," he said. "But it's a thing you can learn when you run out of alternatives." She looked at him sideways. "Is that from the Navy?" "It's from parenting," he said. She laughed. A real one again. He was collecting them without meaning to. The street had changed by the time December settled in. Not dramatically. It was still Pine Ridge, still the same slightly uneven sidewalks, and the same farmer's market on Saturdays, and the same diner with the same sticky sugar dispensers and Patsy behind the counter. But the 4 properties Holloway had already acquired on the corridor sat in legal uncertainty pending the investigation, which meant they were not being developed, which meant the neighborhood remained the neighborhood. Logan had been contacted by 2 of his neighbors who'd sold to Holloway earlier in the year. People who'd made the decision under the impression that the corridor was going to develop regardless, that holding out was pointless. One of them, a woman named Sheila Moran, who'd run a ceramic studio on the block, told him that she'd taken less than her property was worth because sellers had implied that the regulatory environment would make operating there increasingly difficult. He listened to Sheila's account without comment, and then he gave her Francis's number. And Francis told her the same thing she'd told everyone else. Document everything, keep records. The legal process was real and moving, and the people who had accepted pressure sales during an active campaign of regulatory coercion had options worth examining. None of this was fast. None of it was guaranteed. But it was moving, and it was real, and it was visible to anyone who chose to look. Donovan came by the garage on a Friday afternoon in mid-December, in plain clothes again, which Logan had come to recognize as his visiting as a person mode rather than his visiting as a sheriff mode. "State case is moving," Donovan said, accepting a mug of coffee and sitting in the chair that had, over the past 2 months, become something of a regular fixture in Logan's office. "Slowly, but moving." Francis says the same. She would know. Donovan looked at his coffee. "I want you to know that I appreciated you not going to the press with the Pruitt information before I was ready. You could have." "It wasn't mine to go to the press with," Logan said. "A lot of people wouldn't have seen it that way." Logan shrugged. "You came to us off the record because you were trying to do something real. Going around, you would have been using you. I don't do that." Donovan was quiet for a moment. "Your background, the Navy thing, How much of this did that inform? What you saw, what you did, how you moved through it? Logan considered the question honestly, which was more interesting to him than the diplomatic version. The discipline part, the patience, the understanding that information has weight and timing matters. He paused. But the decision to step in at the diner, that wasn't military. That was just not being willing to sit there. Some people would say that's the same thing. Some people haven't been in enough diners, Logan said. Donovan made a sound that was a laugh in the specific register of a tired person who finds something genuinely funny against their expectations. He drank his coffee. How's Vivian? Good, Logan said. Then, more accurately, better than good most days, working through the legal side, running her company. A pause. She's not a person who waits for permission to get on with things. No, Donovan said. She never was, even in school. He set down the mug. Tell her I said so, if it comes up naturally. I will, Logan said. The evening Logan thought about later, the one that mattered most, though he wouldn't have been able to explain in the moment why it was different from other evenings, happened on a Saturday in late December. Vivian had come to Birch Street for the first time, not to the garage, to the house. She'd called in the afternoon and asked if she could come by, which was the kind of call that had a slightly different quality from their usual communication, and he'd said yes and made sure the kitchen table was actually clear, which took longer than it should have because Danny had been doing a project involving approximately 40 index cards and an unwieldy amount of tape. She arrived at 6. Danny answered the door before Logan could get there, which was something Danny did. He had a tendency to be wherever the door was when it opened. Hi, he said. Hi, Vivian said. He stepped back to let her in and then looked critically at the doorframe. It's wide enough, he said, with the evaluating tone of a child who has apparently been thinking about this. Vivian looked at him. What? For your chair. I measured it. He looked at his father. I used the tape measure from the garage. I didn't break it. Logan looked at his son. The matter-of-fact certainty of a person who had, without mentioning it to anyone, gone and gotten the tape measure and applied it to the doorframe because he'd thought about it and decided it was worth knowing. It's wide enough, Vivian confirmed with the expression she got when Danny surprised her, which was an expression Logan had been cataloging with the quiet pleasure of someone who finds a thing consistently good. I know, Danny said. 36 inches. You need 32 minimum. We have 4 extra. Did you look that up? She asked. Yeah. He said this with the slight defensiveness of a child who wants it to be understood that researching things is normal. I looked up a bunch of stuff. The bathroom down the hall is probably okay, but the upstairs one isn't, and the kitchen table is the right height. He looked at his father. We'd need to put a rail by the back steps if she wanted to use the yard. Logan looked at his son for a long moment. Vivian looked at Logan. The yard is fine for now, she said very carefully. Thank you for checking. Danny nodded, satisfied, and went back to the living room where the index cards were in a state of organized catastrophe. Logan and Vivian stayed in the hallway for a second. He did that himself, Logan said. Not quite a question. He did that himself, she confirmed. Something moved through Logan that wasn't quite expressible. The specific thing a parent feels when their child does something that reveals who they're becoming, not a thing you can take credit for exactly, just a thing you're grateful to have witnessed. He said, Kitchen's clear. Lead the way, she said. They had tea and talked about things that weren't about Holloway, or legal proceedings or investigations, about her company's Baltimore contract, which had gone through and was performing well, about a book she was reading that she thought he'd either love or find completely frustrating, about a car Logan had been asked to restore that he was on the fence about because the owner's vision for it involved several modifications Logan found aesthetically offensive. She laughed at his description of the proposed modifications, and he made tea that was better than his coffee, and the kitchen filled with the ordinary sound of a conversation that didn't have an agenda. At some point, Danny came in for a glass of water and stopped at the kitchen door, looking at the two of them at the table with the particular expression of a child taking an inventory. Are you staying for dinner? He asked Vivian. I wasn't planning to, she said. Dad made chili, Danny said. It's actually good. He's been practicing. Logan looked at his son. Thank you. It's true, Danny said. Vivian looked at Logan. He looked back and didn't try to manufacture anything in the look. No pressure, no performance, just, it's up to you, and either answer is fine. All right, she said. Danny nodded with the satisfaction of a person whose recommendation has been accepted and went back to his index cards. Logan went to check on the chili. It was actually good. He had been practicing. January came in cold, the kind of cold that made Pine Ridge feel smaller and closer, people moving faster between buildings. The diner doing better business because anywhere warm was welcome. Logan increased his hours at the garage and took on 2 new regular clients, and spent a Saturday morning helping Danny build a model of a Cretaceous ecosystem for a school presentation, which required more research than either of them had anticipated and produced a mutual understanding of hadrosaurs that neither of them had expected to have. The legal processes continued their slow, documented motion. Francis reported developments every week or two. Nothing dramatic, nothing resolved, but each development building the structure that eventual resolution would stand on. The civil case in the renegotiated form was moving. The state investigation was active. Carter Holloway had accepted a plea arrangement in the criminal matter that involved, among other things, a public statement admitting that he had failed to cooperate fully with the initial investigation following the accident. It was not, Logan knew, the full accounting. It did not restore the 4 years. It did not rebuild what had been taken from the 30-year-old woman in the rehabilitation facility who had signed papers without knowing everything she deserved to know. But it was real, and it was public, and it had Carter Holloway's name on it, and that name was now attached to a specific documented truth that would follow it wherever it went. Vivian, when Logan told her about the plea, was quiet for a moment. "Is that enough?" he asked. "No," she said. "It's not enough." A pause. "But it's something. And sometimes something is the most the process can produce, and you have to decide whether to spend the rest of your life angry at the gap or take what's real and move forward." She paused again. "I'm going to move forward," she said. "I've been moving forward for 4 years. I'm good at it." He looked at her. "Yeah," he said. "You really are." The evening Logan thought about for a long time afterward happened in February. He couldn't have explained exactly what made it the moment because it didn't look like a moment from the outside. It was just dinner again, the 3 of them at the kitchen table on Birch Street, the chili replaced by something Vivian had brought from the Blue House, an actual recipe with actual steps that produced a result that Danny declared better than the chili, which Logan acknowledged was probably fair. The snow that had been threatening all week had finally arrived, coming down soft and steady outside the kitchen window. The kind of snow that made Pine Ridge look like a place out of someone's specific memory of childhood. Danny had been watching it between bites, narrating the accumulation with the running commentary of a person for whom snow remained a genuine event. 2 more inches and school might close, he said. You need 4 or 5 for a cancellation, Logan said. 2 just makes the drive annoying. Unless it freezes on top, Danny said. Then it's worse. True, Vivian said. Ice is significantly more disruptive than snow. Ask me about navigating this neighborhood in an ice storm sometime. Okay, tell me, Danny said immediately. She did. The specific strategic calculation of which routes to take when the curb cuts were iced over, which buildings had covered entrances she could use as waypoints, which neighbors had started salting their sidewalks after she'd mentioned it to them. She described it with the matter-of-fact specificity of someone who had solved the problem rather than suffered it, which was the way she described most things, and Danny listened with the attention of a child absorbing a form of knowledge he hadn't known existed. Logan sat with his food and his coffee and watched them and didn't say anything. He thought about the diner, about a Thursday morning in October when he'd almost not gone, when he'd been 15 minutes from leaving Danny at school and taking a different route to the garage, skipping breakfast because he had an early job waiting. He hadn't skipped breakfast. He'd gone to Ruth Ann's because he went to Ruth Ann's on Thursdays. And he'd sat in the corner booth because he always sat in the corner booth. And 3 men had come in and done a thing that everyone else in the room had decided not to address. He thought about how thin the line was. How many things in his life had turned on the thickness of a line like that? A decision made or not made in a half second, an action taken or not taken, a morning when you went the usual way instead of the other way. He wasn't a person who believed in fate. He'd seen too many things go wrong in ways that didn't have any redemptive narrative attached to them, that were just wrong, just loss, without the kind of meaning that gets assigned to things in retrospect. He didn't think anything had been arranged for him. He didn't think Vivian's accident had a purpose. He didn't think the three men in the diner were a mechanism in someone else's design. What he thought was simpler and harder than that. What he thought was, you don't get to choose most of what happens to you, but you get to choose what you do with where you are when it happens. And sometimes, not always, not even most of the time, but sometimes, the choice you make in the moment when everyone else is looking away is the one that changes the shape of everything that comes after. That was not a dramatic thing. It was not a comforting thing, necessarily. It didn't make the bad things less bad or the losses less real. But it was true. He'd found it to be true, and that was worth something. Danny finished his food and asked if he could be excused, and was excused and migrated to the living room, where he could be heard negotiating with the television remote in the specific way of a child who has been told which shows are acceptable and wants to test the boundary without technically crossing it. The kitchen was quiet with just the two of them and the snow coming down outside. "Good dinner," Logan said. "It's my grandmother's recipe," Vivian said. "She made it every February because she said February needed help." She was right. She was right about most things. A pause. "She died when I was 16. She was the person in my family who paid attention to me in the specific way that made me think I was worth paying attention to." She said it without sentiment, just accurate. I think about her sometimes when I'm doing something that requires more confidence than I actually feel. I think about how she looked at me. It helps. Logan was quiet for a moment. He thought about his own people, about his father, who'd been a mechanic in a town not unlike this one, who'd shown him how to take things apart and put them back together, and had never once suggested there was anything he couldn't fix if he understood it fully enough. About Emma, who had looked at him the way Vivian's grandmother had apparently looked at her. About Danny, who had gotten out a tape measure and measured the door frame. "People do that," he said. "The good ones. They make you feel like the best version of yourself is the real version, not the performance." She looked at him across the table with the full attention look. "Yes," she said. "That's exactly it." They sat with that for a moment. Outside, the snow came down steady, and the kitchen was warm, and from the living room came the muffled evidence of Danny finding an acceptable program. "I'm glad you came to Ruth Ann's that Thursday," Vivian said. He looked at her. "I go every Thursday." "I know. I'm glad you went that Thursday, too." A small pause. "I'm glad you sat in the corner booth." "I always sit in the corner booth." "Logan," she said, with the dry precision she used when she wanted to cut through his deflection without making a production of it. "I am saying thank you. For all of it. For walking across the diner and fixing the chair and the cameras and the lawyer and sitting beside me at the hearing and being here." She met his eyes directly. "I am saying that my life is better for knowing you, and that is a thing I mean specifically and without exaggeration." He held her gaze. "Mine too," he said. "For knowing you." She nodded once. Then she picked up her tea and looked at the window and the snow coming down, and he picked up his coffee and did the same. And they sat in the warm kitchen while February continued to need help outside. And from the living room, Danny laughed at something on the television, and the house held them all the way a house does when it's become the right place for the right people. It wasn't a perfect life. Logan's cooking was going to remain serviceable at best. The legal processes were going to take another year, maybe more, and be uncomfortable in the specific ways that legal processes are when they require you to revisit things you'd organized yourself around having moved past. Vivian was going to have days when the weight of what had been done to her landed again, fresh, the way old injuries do. Danny was going to grow up with the gap-toothed unself-consciousness of a child who measured door frames and declared dinners better than chili and had not yet learned to be strategic about caring about people. And Logan was going to keep sitting in the corner booth. He was going to keep noticing things. He was going to keep, when the moment required it, walking across the room. Not because it was heroic, not because he'd been trained to, not because the outcome was guaranteed or the math always worked in favor of the person who stepped in, but because the alternative, sitting in the corner with your coffee while someone else's life was made smaller, was a thing he simply couldn't do, had never been able to do, even before the Navy, even before Emma, even before he understood that about himself. It was the most ordinary thing about him. It was also the most important. The snow kept coming. The kitchen stayed warm. Outside on Birch Street, Pine Ridge settled into its quiet February evening, and inside a house that had once been just a house. Three people who had found each other through a bent wheel and a bad morning, and the decision of one person to not look away, sat with the ordinary and extraordinary fact of being, against the odds and through significant effort, exactly where they belonged.